If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, The Headmaster's Office. Arthur woke early the next morning, his mind already focused on the rare magical texts he would soon acquire. He completed his usual exercise routine before heading to breakfast, mentally listing the specific aspects of alchemy he hoped Dumbledore's book would cover. The conversion of magical energy, applications beyond mere transmutation, and theoretical frameworks that might connect alchemy to more modern magical disciplines topped his list of interests. The Great Hall was buzzing with excited conversation when he arrived, the previous night's events having provided the student body with enough gossip material to last until Christmas. As Arthur made his way to his usual isolated spot at the Slytherin table, conversations faltered momentarily before resuming at a more frenzied pitch. Refused to compete until they bribed him. Threatened to let whoever put his name in lose their magic. Bargained with Dumbledore himself. These fragments painted a picture of how the events in the Great Hall were being interpreted with considerably more accuracy than usual for Hogwarts rumors. Arthur noted that several Slytherins were conspicuously absent from breakfast, including Bull, who had so publicly incriminated himself the previous night. The arrival of the Morning Post brought a flurry of owls, many carrying copies of the Daily Prophet. The newspaper had wasted no time covering the tournament developments, its front page dominated by a large headline. Triwizard Tournament marred by controversy, Boy Who Lived selected as unprecedented fourth champion. Beneath this was a smaller sub-headline that made Arthur raise an eyebrow. Muggle-born Slytherin extorts valuable magical knowledge for participation. A nearby student's copy provided Arthur with the full article, which painted him in predictably unflattering terms. Rita Skeeter's prose dripped with insinuation as she described how Arthur Hayes, a Muggle-born student controversially sorted into Slytherin House, exploited a technical loophole to blackmail tournament officials. The article went on to question the moral character of a student who would place personal gain above school honor and featured quotes from unnamed school experts suggesting his behavior exemplified typical Slytherin cunning without the traditional family values that usually temper such ambition. Arthur scanned the article with mild amusement, noting that Skeeter had managed to simultaneously criticize him for being both too Slytherin, in his negotiation tactics, and not Slytherin enough, lacking proper wizarding heritage. More interesting was the article's treatment of Potter, which focused almost exclusively on his famous past while barely touching on the irregularity of his selection. Skeeter had clearly decided that the Boy Who Lived narrative would sell more papers than investigating how a fourth name had emerged from the goblet. Having finished his breakfast, Arthur departed the Great Hall with purposeful strides, indifferent to the whispers that followed him. The opinions of his classmates or the wider wizarding public, for that matter, were irrelevant to his plans. What mattered were the books he had been promised, and it was time to collect them. He made his way through the castle corridors, passing several portraits that seemed to be discussing him as well. Apparently, news traveled quickly even among the painted inhabitants of Hogwarts. One particularly pompous wizard in Tudor attire actually called out, "Young man! Is it true you negotiated with Albus Dumbledore himself?" Arthur ignored the question, maintaining his brisk pace toward the headmaster's office. Arriving at the stone gargoyle that guarded the entrance, Arthur realized he'd overlooked a significant detail: he didn't know the password. Dumbledore had been in no mood to share such information the previous night, and in his eagerness to secure the books, Arthur hadn't thought to ask. "Typical," he muttered, staring at the impassive stone guardian. After a moment's consideration, Arthur recalled what he knew about Dumbledore's password preferences. The headmaster famously used sweet names as his office passwords. With nothing to lose, Arthur began systematically working through possibilities. Chocolate frog, he tried first. The gargoyle remained motionless. Pepper imps. Nothing. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Still nothing, though Arthur thought he detected a slight twitch of disapproval. Dumbledore's dislike for that particular sweet was well known. Fizzing Whizbee, Arthur said, reaching deeper into his knowledge of wizarding confectionery. The gargoyle sprang to life, leaping aside to reveal the spiral staircase beyond. Arthur allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction as he stepped onto the moving stairs, which carried him upward to the polished oak door of the headmaster's office. He knocked once but received no answer. After a brief hesitation, he turned the brass handle and found the door unlocked. The circular office beyond was empty of human presence, though dozens of portraits of previous headmasters and headmistresses lined the walls, many pretending to sleep while clearly observing him through narrowed eyelids. "Good morning," Arthur said politely to the room at large. "Professor Dumbledore asked me to meet him here." A few portraits nodded stiffly in acknowledgement. Others made no pretense of hiding their scrutiny, watching him with undisguised suspicion as he stood in the center of the room, taking in his surroundings. The office was exactly as he'd heard it described, cluttered yet somehow orderly, filled with delicate silver instruments that emitted occasional puffs of colored smoke. Bookshelves lined the walls between portraits, filled with volumes that made Arthur's fingers itch with curiosity. A massive claw-footed desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with neatly arranged parchments and magical instruments. One conspicuous absence was Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, whose perch stood empty near the desk. Arthur was about to take a seat to wait when a flash of fire erupted above the perch, momentarily filling the office with blinding golden light. When the light faded, the phoenix had appeared, its scarlet plumage gleaming as though lit from within. Fawkes regarded Arthur with intelligent black eyes, tilting his magnificent head in what appeared to be curiosity rather than hostility. "Hello there," Arthur said quietly, approaching the perch with careful steps. "I suppose we haven't been properly introduced. I'm Arthur Hayes." The phoenix trilled a soft note that seemed to resonate directly in Arthur's chest, creating a strange sensation of warmth. Emboldened by this seemingly friendly response, Arthur cautiously extended his hand, half expecting the magical creature to reject his touch. To his surprise, Fawkes leaned forward, allowing Arthur to gently stroke the brilliant feathers at the top of his head. The phoenix closed his eyes in apparent contentment, trilling another soft note that felt like pure joy translated into sound. "I have not seen Fawkes take to anyone other than Dumbledore quite like this, Mr. Hayes," observed a dry voice from somewhere behind him. Arthur turned to locate the speaker, recognizing the voice even before his eyes found its source. The Sorting Hat sat on a high shelf, its patched and frayed form immediately recognizable despite being dormant for most of the year. "Long time no see, Sorting Hat," Arthur replied with a nod of acknowledgement. "Was it a long time?" "Well, for you it might be." The hat's brim creased in what might have been a smile. "I have heard quite a lot about your antics, Mr. Hayes. Fighting, detentions, and whatnot." Arthur continued stroking Fawkes, who seemed in no hurry to end the interaction. "Well, did you expect any less when you sorted me into Slytherin?" "No," the hat replied thoughtfully, "and as I expected, you excelled among the difficulty. You have become a strong wizard quite quickly. If not for the challenges presented by the House of Salazar, it would have taken you much more time." "That's true," Arthur conceded, "but I might have made some friends in the wizarding world." The hat's fabric shifted in what appeared to be the equivalent of a knowing look. "We both know that your lack of friends is not because of me, Mr. Hayes. With your cunning, you could have overcome the early problems and become a popular student in this school. It's just that you didn't want to." Arthur smiled wryly. "You read me like a book, don't you, old hat?" "That's my job," the hat replied with a hint of pride. "I have 1,000 years of experience in this. Never been wrong." "Maybe," Arthur said, his tone suggesting skepticism, "but I do think some students like Potter and Longbottom would have excelled in other houses." "Perhaps. Both were difficult to sort, and in the end, the choice was theirs. But they are doing fine, aren't they?" Arthur was about to ask a follow-up question when the door opened and Dumbledore himself entered, looking mildly surprised to find his office already occupied. "It seems I've interrupted something," the headmaster observed, his bright blue eyes taking in the unusual sight of Arthur Hayes petting Fawkes while conversing with the Sorting Hat. Chapter 22, Dumbledore. "Not at all, Headmaster," Arthur replied smoothly, giving Fawkes a final gentle stroke before stepping away from the perch. "The Sorting Hat and I were just reminiscing about my placement in Slytherin." "Indeed we were," the hat called from its shelf. "Discussing one of my more controversial decisions in recent years." Dumbledore moved toward his desk with unhurried grace, his robe swishing softly against the stone floor. "Yes. From what I've heard from the professors, you would have excelled in any house. It's unfortunate that you were sorted into Slytherin." "I take offense to that," the Sorting Hat interjected, its fabric crinkling indignantly. "Slytherin was the best house for the boy, as evidenced by how he negotiated his way through the forced participation in the Triwizard Tournament. Salazar himself would have approved." Arthur's lips curved into a slight smile. "When the Sorting Hat offered, I didn't reject the placement. So it wasn't completely the hat's decision." Dumbledore settled into his chair, the wood creaking slightly as he leaned forward, fingers forming a steeple beneath his silver beard. "I would have preferred you in another house so that you could build relationships within the school. As can be seen from Fawkes's behavior with you, I'm sure it would have been good for everyone." The headmaster glanced at his phoenix. He's typically quite selective about whom he allows such familiarity. Perhaps he recognizes a kindred spirit, the Sorting Hat offered. Someone who, like a phoenix, thrives amid fire rather than being consumed by it. Dumbledore raised an eyebrow at this cryptic statement but didn't pursue it. Instead, he gestured for Arthur to take a seat in the chair opposite his desk. I assume you're here for the books we discussed, Mr. Hayes. Yes, Professor, Arthur replied, settling into the offered chair. I appreciate your punctuality in honoring our agreement. A flicker of something, perhaps annoyance, perhaps reluctant respect, crossed Dumbledore's features before his expression returned to its usual benign inscrutability. I've always found that promptness in fulfilling one's promises prevents unnecessary complications. The pause before the last two words carried subtle weight. The headmaster opened a drawer in his desk and withdrew a large, leather-bound volume that appeared centuries old. Its cover was a deep burgundy color with intricate silver symbols embossed along the spine and edges, alchemical notation that Arthur recognized as representing processes of transmutation and purification. Principia Alchemica, Dumbledore said, placing the book on the desk between them. It was given to me by Nicholas Flamel himself. Arthur carefully kept his expression neutral despite the surge of excitement he felt. This was far more valuable than he had anticipated, a book once owned by the legendary alchemist himself, possibly containing knowledge that existed nowhere else in the world. I trust you understand the responsibility that comes with such knowledge, Dumbledore continued, his tone measured. There are sections that describe processes which, if attempted without proper precaution, could have devastating consequences. I understand, Professor, Arthur replied seriously. I have no intention of attempting practical alchemy without thoroughly mastering the theoretical foundations. Dumbledore studied him for a moment longer before nodding and reaching back into the drawer. He withdrew two more volumes, each distinct in appearance. The first was bound in pale blue leather that seemed to shimmer slightly in the light, with the title L'Art de l'Enchantement embossed in silver script. The second was a darker tome, bound in what appeared to be black dragon hide, with no visible title. Madame Maxime's Contribution on the Art of Enchantment, Dumbledore explained, indicating the blue book, and Professor Karkaroff's volume on Eastern European curse theory. He gestured toward the black tome. Both were delivered to me this morning, as promised. Arthur reached for the books, maintaining his composed demeanor despite his eagerness to examine their contents. The enchantment text felt strangely warm to the touch, while Karkaroff's contribution seemed to absorb the light around it, a common characteristic of books dealing with darker magical arts. Before you depart with these, Mr. Hayes, Dumbledore said, I feel compelled to ask, what is it you hope to achieve with such specialized knowledge? The question was casual in tone but probing in intent. Arthur considered his response carefully, aware that this was more than idle curiosity on the headmaster's part. Understanding, Professor, he replied finally. Magic exists in many forms across different cultures and traditions. By studying diverse approaches, whether alchemy, enchantment, or even the darker arts, one can identify the common principles that underlie all magical phenomena. A scholarly answer, Dumbledore observed, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Yet I wonder if there is perhaps a more practical application you have in mind. Arthur met the headmaster's gaze without flinching. Knowledge is power, Professor. Everything doesn't need to be applied directly. It can be reference for better applications in the future. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression, a hint of recognition, perhaps even empathy, that Arthur hadn't expected to see. An honest answer, at least. Though I would caution that power sought for its own sake has led many a talented wizard down destructive paths. I seek neither power nor knowledge for its own sake, Arthur clarified, the books heavy in his hands. They are means to specific ends. Ends I believe are reasonable and justified. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly. And those ends are? To live a free life without being controlled by fear, he replied, memories of his parents' murder briefly darkening his thoughts, and to ensure I have the power to keep the people close to me safe. A long moment of silence followed this statement. Finally, Dumbledore nodded, as if reaching some internal conclusion. A worthy goal, though the path you've chosen to pursue it is perhaps more confrontational than most. Arthur allowed himself a small, rueful smile. Confrontation wasn't my first choice, Professor. But 7 years in Slytherin House have taught me that accommodation and compromise are rarely offered to those perceived as outsiders. A fair observation, Dumbledore conceded with a slight nod. Though I would have preferred you not to have isolated yourself. I see in you the strength and means to change the wizarding world. To help muggleborns like yourself have better lives and opportunities. It's too much of a hassle, Arthur replied with a dismissive shrug. If someone like you, Headmaster, with all the strength and influence you possess, couldn't change the way Muggleborns are perceived in Wizarding Britain, then what chance would I have had? Dumbledore's eyes took on a distant look. I have failed in many ways, but that doesn't mean it's the end. From my experience, I've learned that young minds can always bring surprises where old ones see only established patterns. I do have ways to change things, Arthur said, the admission surprising even himself, but they would require a radical revolution that I suspect you wouldn't approve of. And anyway, it seemed a thankless job, so I wasn't particularly motivated to pursue it. Dumbledore studied him thoughtfully. So may I ask, what are your plans after graduating from Hogwarts this year? For a moment, Arthur considered deflection, but something in the old wizard's expression made him reconsider. Perhaps, at the end of his time at Hogwarts, a partial truth was warranted. Arthur said, well, I have many plans. Professor, do you know of the other hidden communities on this planet? Other hidden communities? Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly, genuine curiosity replacing his usual calculated interest. Have you heard about Camartage? Arthur asked, watching closely for the headmaster's reaction. He wasn't disappointed. Dumbledore's eyes widened, a flicker of recognition and surprise breaking through his carefully maintained composure. Camartage. That's a name I haven't heard in quite some time. The headmaster leaned forward. How did you learn about them? I don't know much, Arthur said carefully, hiding his satisfaction at having caught Dumbledore off guard, just rumors about them. How they have mages who can also do things like us. I might go there after Hogwarts. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Dumbledore replied, regaining his equilibrium, but I've been told that the way they do magic is very different from ours and is not particularly compatible. Arthur wasn't deterred. Maybe, but I would still like to visit them. And I wonder, since magic is real, what about other things I've read about in fiction? Aliens, superheroes. I'd like to meet them and perhaps make some friends. Aliens? Superheroes? Now Dumbledore looked genuinely confused, his silvery eyebrows drawing together. What do these terms mean? Muggle concepts, Arthur explained, enjoying the rare opportunity to educate the headmaster. Have you heard of Captain America? He was the world's first public superhero. And aliens are beings who live outside our planet. Outside our planet? In outer space. Dumbledore's expression was almost comical in its bewilderment. How can one travel in space? How is that possible? The wizarding world is behind on news, Arthur said with a hint of condescension he couldn't quite suppress. Muggles have already set foot on the moon and might soon travel further in space. If Muggles can do that, who's to say other planets don't have life as well? What if all the myths floating around Greek and Norse mythology, for instance, are actually about aliens? The possibility exists. Dumbledore leaned back, looking suddenly weary, the weight of his years evident in the slump of his shoulders. I fear I'm too old for all this. I would have preferred you stayed in our world and helped fix its problems, but I can see that your ambitions lie elsewhere, and there's nothing I can do to change that. His blue eyes met Arthur's with unexpected earnestness. I wish you the best of luck for your future, and I hope you always maintain a clear mind and don't stray toward darkness. I'll do my best, Professor, Arthur promised, rising from his chair and carefully gathering the 3 precious tomes. Their weight in his arms felt like the beginning of something new. Thank you for these books. Goodbye. As the door closed behind Arthur, Dumbledore turned toward the Sorting Hat, his expression thoughtful. What do you make of everything Mr. Hayes said? Do things like aliens truly exist? Are there other hidden communities like Camartage on this planet? Perhaps, the Hat replied. From what I know of Mr. Hayes, he's not some idle dreamer. If he believes these things possible, he must know something we do not. The ancient artifact paused before adding, does this make you want to start adventuring again, Albus? No, Dumbledore sighed, stroking his beard absently. I'm far too old for adventures. It's the turn of the young ones now. And what do you think of Mr. Hayes? The Hat pressed. Do you regret not listening to me 7 years ago and failing to build a closer bond between him and the wizarding world? Dumbledore gazed at Fawkes, who had settled back on his perch and was watching the headmaster with knowing eyes. A delightful and ambitious young man. Talented, too. Nothing like Tom. A shadow passed over his features. However, there's little use in regrets now. Yet you have them, the Hat observed shrewdly. Many, Dumbledore admitted quietly. But perhaps it's for the best. The path Arthur Hayes walks is not one I could have guided him along, even had I tried. Some journeys must be undertaken alone. Or perhaps, the Sorting Hat suggested, you simply prefer your champions to be more pliable. Like young Potter. Dumbledore didn't answer, his gaze now fixed on the window where the distant mountains met the sky. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts and paths not taken. Outside, Arthur Hayes strode walked through the Hogwarts corridors, the 3 ancient tomes clutched to his chest, his mind already racing with the possibilities they contained. Chapter 23, Perks, Plans, and Preparations. In the days following his unexpected selection as Hogwarts champion, Arthur discovered that the position came with several advantages. Professors had become noticeably more lenient. Flitwick no longer required him to submit weekly charms essays, McGonagall waived his transfiguration assignments as long as he could perform the spells in class, and even Snape merely raised an eyebrow when Arthur arrived late to potions. Most importantly, his curfew had been extended. Dumbledore had given him written permission to be in the castle's common areas until midnight. Not that Arthur had ever strictly followed curfew, but official approval eliminated unnecessary sneaking around and he could now walk openly at night. Despite these privileges, Arthur's social standing in the school remained unchanged. The Slytherins still kept their distance. The other houses continued to avoid him entirely. Becoming the Hogwarts champion hadn't changed anything. His display of strength against the 20 bullies on the morning of the champion selection and his behavior afterward only created more fear and awe, which did nothing to improve his social situation. This suited Arthur perfectly. Fewer social distractions meant more time for his research. The 3 books he'd obtained through his negotiation proved invaluable. While Karkaroff's volume on curses didn't provide him with much new information, Dumbledore's Principia Alchemica and Madame Maxime's L'Art de l'Enchantement were true treasures. Arthur established 2 main research projects based on these texts. With the enchantment volume, he began studying methods to reshape magical objects. His goal was to modify Ravenclaw's diadem, the valuable resource which had helped speed up his studies over the past 6 years, into something less noticeable. The diadem significantly enhanced his mental abilities when worn, making his thoughts clearer and his magical understanding deeper, but it had a problem. Its formatiarum made it impractical to wear openly around others. Arthur wanted to transfer its properties to a ring or pendant that wouldn't draw attention, allowing him to benefit from its power constantly rather than only in private. The clear thoughts and understanding would give him major advantages when dueling too. His second project involved Flamel's alchemy text. Since this world was a crossover between the Harry Potter and Marvel universes, vibranium and adamantium, 2 powerful and incredibly valuable materials, actually existed. If he could master the alchemical principles needed to analyze and eventually replicate these substances, it would provide enormous advantages for his future. While these magical pursuits occupied much of his waking thoughts, Arthur had another very important side project. Something crucial for his future plans. A major event in the Marvel Universe was going to happen in a few months, and Arthur wanted to make sure he was there to witness it. The event, the arrival of Carol Danvers, the future Captain Marvel, on Earth. According to his memories, Captain Marvel would crash land at a Blockbuster video store in California sometime in 1995, just months away. Being present for this event would provide vital information about power levels in this universe. The Marvel movies Arthur remembered had shown frustrating inconsistencies, characters with vastly different abilities somehow fighting as equals. Captain America briefly holding back Thanos. Iron Man trading blows with Thor, but the same Iron Man struggling against Captain America and Winter Soldier together. This made for exciting movies but seemed unrealistic in real life. To properly understand where he might eventually fit in this world's power hierarchy, Arthur needed accurate reference points. Captain Marvel was perfect for this purpose. With her Kree inhibitor in place, she operated at roughly the level of enhanced humans like Captain America. Without it, her powers approached cosmic levels. Observing her strengths and transformation firsthand would establish a practical power scale Arthur could use to guide his own development. The challenge was figuring out exactly where and when she would appear. Arthur only knew it would be at a Blockbuster in California sometime in 1995. There were dozens of such stores throughout the state, and sometime next year wasn't precise enough for effective planning. He would need to develop a strategy to narrow down the possibilities. While working through these problems one evening, a scared first year came up to him with a message, informing Arthur that his presence was required the following afternoon for the weighing of the wands ceremony. The junior somehow managed to deliver the message and then ran away, as if Arthur were a monster who might eat him. When Arthur arrived at the designated classroom, he found it had been rearranged for the occasion. Fleur Delacour was examining her reflection in a compact mirror, Victor Crumb slouched against a wall with his usual scowl, and Harry Potter had not yet arrived. An unwelcome presence was Rita Skeeter, the Daily Prophet's most notorious reporter, accompanied by a photographer whose camera emitted occasional puffs of purple smoke. Arthur immediately adopted his strategy, complete and utter indifference. He found a quiet corner and stood facing the wall, appearing deeply interested in the stone pattern, effectively turning his back on the entire proceeding. Skeeter, naturally, approached him first. "Mr. Hayes," she called out in her syrupy voice. "Arthur. A quick word for the Daily Prophet? Our readers are dying to know how a Muggle-born Slytherin feels about representing Hogwarts after coercing the judges." Arthur gave no reaction. He didn't turn, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way. It was as if she were speaking to the stone wall itself. "Playing hard to get, are we?" Skeeter purred, moving closer. Bozo raised his camera, the flashbulb popping momentarily. "Come now, Arthur, don't be shy. Tell us about your unique journey. How does it feel to achieve such prominence despite your humble origins? Any tips for other ambitious youngsters?" Silence. Arthur remained perfectly still, his focus seemingly unwavering from the intricate patterns of the castle's stonework. Fleur Delacour watched with wide eyes, whispering something in French to Crumb, who merely grunted, though his gaze lingered on Arthur with grudging curiosity. Even they seemed impressed by Arthur's apparent immunity to Skeeter's famously persistent questioning. They didn't know the secret, of course they just saw incredible patience or perhaps deep arrogance. Frustrated, Rita circled Arthur, trying different angles, her voice growing slightly sharper. "Is it true you physically assaulted 20 fellow students a few weeks ago? Using Muggle fighting techniques? Quite scandalous for a Hogwarts champion, wouldn't you say? Any comment on those accusations?" Still nothing. Arthur might as well have been a statue. Rita Skeeter, a journalist who could usually provoke a reaction from even the most composed wizards, was visibly flustered. Her quill paused, hovering uselessly over her notepad. Just as her frustration reached its peak, Harry Potter nervously entered the room. Seeing an easier target, Rita immediately abandoned Arthur and descended upon Harry with predatory glee. "Harry. Just the boy I wanted to see. What's it like being the youngest champion in history? How about an interview?" The poor boy was dragged into a broom closet in the room. Fleur and Crumb silently prayed for his sanity. Shortly after, Dumbledore arrived with the judges and Mr. Ollivander, rescuing Harry from Skeeter's clutches. As the headmaster organized everyone for the ceremony, he paused near Arthur. Then with a subtle flick and a murmured word, a faint shimmering distortion around Arthur dissolved. A nearly invisible silencing ward collapsed. Rita Skeeter's eyes widened as she understood. He hadn't been ignoring her through sheer willpower, he'd simply been unable to hear her at all. Her face flushed bright red with anger, and she shot Arthur a look venomous enough to curdle milk. He finally turned from the wall, met her glare with complete indifference, and offered a faint, almost invisible smirk that only made her more furious. The ceremony began with Ollivander examining each champion's wand in turn. Fliss Rosewood and Villahair wand produced a bouquet of flowers under the wandmaker's testing. Crumb's Hornbeam and Dragon Heartstring wand created a small flock of birds that circled the room before disappearing in a puff of smoke. When Arthur's turn came, he presented his wand with formal politeness, watching Ollivander's reaction carefully. "Ah, yes," Ollivander murmured. "Elder wood, 13 inches, with a core of thestral tail hair. A rare combination, and quite powerful." His long fingers traced the wand's length. "It has been used frequently, but I detect a significant decrease in recent usage. The magical signature is less prominent than I would expect for a wand of this age. I've been focusing more on wandless magic," Arthur explained simply. This statement produced visible reactions from everyone present. Wandless magic was considered extremely advanced, beyond the abilities of most fully qualified wizards, let alone students. Even Dumbledore raised an eyebrow slightly. "Indeed," Ollivander said, his silver eyes studying Arthur with renewed interest. "A challenging pursuit, but one I don't approve of as a wand maker. Don't want my business to go away, do I?" He conjured a stream of silver smoke rings to demonstrate the wand's function before returning it. Harry's Holly and Phoenix Feather wand completed the examination, with Ollivander making no mention of its connection to Voldemort's wand. The ceremony concluded with a tedious photography session. Rita Skeeter attempted to position Arthur front and center, probably hoping to create a story around his arrogance, but he maneuvered himself to the edge of every shot, maintaining a neutral expression that would give her little to work with. As Arthur left the ceremony and headed back toward the dungeons, his mind was already returning to his projects. The first task was drawing closer, but for Arthur Hayes, the Triwizard Tournament was merely a stepping stone on a far larger, more complex journey. Chapter 24, Dragons and Conversations. The next morning's Daily Prophet arrived with the familiar shriek of owl wings and the thud of newspapers landing on breakfast tables throughout the great hall. Arthur barely glanced up from his porridge as a copy landed beside his plate, but the bold headline immediately caught his attention. Triwizard Tragedy, the boy who lived in the Muggle-born manipulator. Under the headline was a photo of Harry looking totally bewildered, and a smaller pic of Arthur turning away from the camera like he couldn't care less. The article was Rita Skeeter at her finest, full of hints, lies and straight-up fiction. Rita's made-up story painted Harry as a tragic young hero haunted by his parents' deaths who often cries at night, while Arthur was a cold, calculating Muggle-born who orchestrated his entry to the tournament to extort valuable magical knowledge from tournament officials. He was a cunning thief who would do anything to get what he wants. As if that wasn't enough drama, the article claimed Arthur and Harry were in a bitter rivalry for Hogwarts glory, with Arthur desperate to beat the boy who lived and grab fame for himself. Another equally rubbish article on the next page suggested Harry and Hermione Granger were romantically involved, with fake quotes and ridiculous stuff about love potions. Arthur schemed both articles with slight amusement. Rita's attempt to trash his reputation was so obvious it was almost funny. But Arthur didn't react. He knew reporters like her thrived on reactions, and not giving her one would drive her barmy. The real annoyance showed up later, brought by a bunch of agitated school owls. Hate mail. Brilliant. The first letter he opened started smoking at the edges, obviously a howler that someone tried to make even nastier with extra hexes. Arthur checked it out quickly before doing a series of fast wand movements. The letter sealed itself back up, and he tied it to one of the waiting owls with a note saying return to sender plus a sneaky confuse charm that would make sure the sender opened their own trap without thinking twice. He did the same with all the hate mail. Some had bubotuber pus, others had hexes meant to cause embarrassing stuff like boils or temporary blindness. Each one got sent right back to whoever sent it, with subtle spells making sure they'd get a taste of their own medicine. Pity I can't watch what happens, Arthur muttered as the last owl flew off. Nothing teaches a lesson like experiencing your own nasty tricks. With that distraction dealt with, Arthur went back to his research schedule. Days flew by as he dove into complicated theories about enchantments and alchemical transformation. He only broke his routine when some alert spells he'd set up around the castle grounds triggered something big and magical had entered the Forbidden Forest. Arthur knew exactly what it meant. The dragons for the first task had arrived. For once, Arthur felt genuinely excited. Despite everything he knew from books, he'd never actually seen a real, full-grown dragon. The baby Norbert that Hagrid hatched a few years ago didn't count, way too small. His childhood had been all about speed learning, staying alive, and mastering magic, with zero time for checking out the cool magical creatures. Now, with the chance to see actual dragons up close, curiosity actually broke through his usual emotional wall. Plus, he needed to confirm some theories for his first task plan. He didn't even wait for nightfall. He grabbed the invisibility cloak from his expanded bag, threw it on, and headed straight for the forest. Following the magical traces his detection spells picked up, Arthur found himself at the edge of a huge clearing that had been turned into a makeshift dragon pen. Dozens of wizards ran around, yelling instructions and casting spells on massive chains and barriers. The dragons themselves were absolutely incredible. The first was a silvery blue beast with short horns and scales that shone like metal in the afternoon light, a Swedish short snout. Arthur watched it shoot bright blue flames when a handler got too close. Those flames looked hot enough to melt bone in seconds. Even for such a massive creature, it moved crazy fast, showing killer reflexes. Next was a smaller but still deadly dragon with smooth green scales, a Welsh green. It blended in so well with the forest that Arthur could barely spot it until it moved. Its roar was weirdly musical, almost like a bird's call. It seemed the least aggressive of the bunch, though least aggressive for a dragon still meant seriously dangerous. The third dragon was eye-catching, bright red scales with a fringe of golden spikes around its face like some kind of living crown. The Chinese fireball moved with surprising grace for something so huge, its body coiling and uncoiling like a giant snake. When some poor handler stepped too close, it released this mushroom-shaped fire cloud that burned a perfect circle in the ground. Yikes! But the fourth dragon was the one that really grabbed Arthur's attention, the Hungarian horntail. Covered in black scales with bronze horns sticking out from its head, tail, and all along its spine, it was like something from a nightmare. Its yellow eyes tracked the handlers with a scary intelligence that seemed almost human. When it roared, Arthur could feel the ground shake under his feet. This one was clearly the most aggressive, constantly fighting against its chains and randomly blasting fire everywhere. Each dragon was super protective of its eggs, which made sense since Arthur knew from his memories that the task would involve stealing a golden egg from their nests. Moving carefully around the enclosure, Arthur did some subtle magical tests, sending nearly invisible pulses of different magical energies at each dragon and watching how they reacted. After spending an hour watching and testing, Arthur slipped away with a satisfied smile. The dragons were seriously powerful, no doubt about it, but they definitely had weaknesses he could exploit. His plan for the first task would work perfectly. The next day, as Arthur headed to the library to continue his usual studies and research, someone called out to him from behind. Hayes? Arthur? Got a minute? Arthur turned around to find Harry Potter standing awkwardly in the middle of the hallway, looking nervous as hell. The boy was fidgeting with the sleeve of his robe. Arthur raised an eyebrow, slightly amused. Potter. What brings you here? Lost your way to Gryffindor Tower? Harry's face went a bit red. No, I just wanted to. He trailed off, obviously intimidated. Arthur couldn't help laughing at how uncomfortable the boy looked. Why so frightened? Where's that brave Gryffindor who killed a 1,000-year-old basilisk and drove off hundreds of Dementors? Am I more terrifying than all that? I'm rather flattered. Harry's eyes went wide with shock. You're not frightening. Hang on, how do you know about the basilisk and the Dementors? Nobody knows about that except Ron, Hermione, and Dumbledore. Arthur tapped his temple. I have my ways, Potter. Bit of a secret, that. So, was there a reason you stopped me, or were you just testing if the rumors about me being terrifying are true? Oh. Harry seemed to find his courage. I wanted to thank you for defending me to the professors that night when the goblet chose us. You said I didn't put my name in. Even when? He looked at the floor, even when some of my mates didn't believe me. Arthur shrugged like it was nothing. Didn't take any effort. Saying obvious stuff usually doesn't. As for your friends not believing you, he paused, looking at Harry thoughtfully. Wizards who grew up only in the magical world often don't see the bigger picture. Their whole life is just family, a few friends, and Hogwarts. They don't get exposed to different ideas or learn to think critically like people who've seen the Muggle world properly. Their common sense is limited by their narrow experiences. Don't be too hard on them for being, well, kinda simple-minded. Harry looked like he was really thinking about it. That, actually makes sense. Thanks. He hesitated again. But that's not the main reason I came to find you. No. No. The first task, it's dragons. Harry blurted out, looking relieved to have said it but also worried about how Arthur would react. Arthur just said, oh. Harry stared at him. What? That's it? Oh. You already knew. Since they showed up in the forest yesterday, yeah, Arthur confirmed casually. Went to check them out right after. Pretty amazing creatures, aren't they? Harry's shoulders dropped. So. I came all this way for nothing, then. I found out from Hagrid, and I saw Madame Maxime and Karkaroff sneaking to the forest too. I figured they'd tell Fleur and Crumb. It didn't seem fair if you were the only one who didn't know. Always playing the hero, Potter, Arthur said, though he wasn't being mean about it. Noble, but unnecessary. Still, I appreciate the thought. Now, you should probably focus on your own problems. You've got a dragon to face in a few hours. Yeah, Harry said, his brief confidence disappearing and the usual worry coming back. I'm totally screwed. How come you're not freaking out about this? Because I have a plan and I'm prepared, Arthur said simply. Right. Plan. Preparation. Harry sighed. I should go. Try to figure something out. He started to walk away. Wait, Arthur said suddenly. Harry turned back, surprised. Since you tried to do something decent, even if I didn't need it, here's a little reward. He paused, his face giving nothing away. The dragons are nesting mothers. They're guarding their eggs. The task will definitely involve taking something from their nest. Harry still looked miserable. Thanks, but that doesn't really help. I can't think of anything that would let me get past a dragon. Arthur spotted the fake Moody lurking nearby. He knew the disguised Death Eater would help Harry, but it wouldn't hurt to give the kid an extra push in the right direction. I'll show you a spell, Arthur said, pulling out his wand. Watch the movements carefully. I'll only show you once, and it's up to you to figure out how to use it. With precise movements, Arthur pointed his wand and said clearly, Oxio Cap. Got that? He asked. Yeah, but what does this? Before Harry could finish, a cricket cap zoomed out from an alcove nearby and smacked right into Arthur's waiting hand. Bloody hell, Harry said, clearly impressed. The summoning charm. Rather useful, that. That's all you get, Arthur said, stuffing the cap in his pocket. How you use it is your problem. Harry stared at him, trying to figure out the hint. You're really not like what everyone says about you. Oh yeah? What fantastic tales are they telling now? Arthur asked mildly. That you're like some nutter who loves fighting, Harry mumbled, embarrassed. That you hex people just for looking at you, that you hate everyone, never talk, rubbish like that. But you're not. You're different. Arthur gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Life forces you to adapt, Potter. If the Sorting Hat had put you in Slytherin like it wanted to, he stopped as Harry's eyes went wide again, you probably would have ended up acting like me to survive. Prejudice forces tough choices. Being alone becomes protection. Being underestimated becomes an advantage. For Muggleborns or outsiders in Slytherin, being nice is a luxury you can't afford. How do you know the hat almost put me in Slytherin? Harry whispered, totally confused. Like I said, Arthur replied, turning to continue toward the library, I know things. Must dash, Potter. Good luck with your dragon. As he walked away, Arthur thought about the odd conversation he'd just had. He usually avoided unnecessary interactions, especially with someone as tied up in fate's plans as Harry Potter. So why had he bothered helping Harry when he knew fake Moody would help him anyway? Maybe it was nostalgia for stories he vaguely remembered from another life. Maybe he felt sorry for a kid whose life was constantly manipulated by fate and powerful wizards, never getting to just be a normal kid. Or maybe, Arthur thought, he was just bored and wanted to do something interesting before he left the wizarding world behind for good. Chapter 25, The First Task. The morning of the first task dawned grey and blustery, with tension hanging in the air so thick you could almost taste it. Lessons dragged on in a blur of distracted whispers and nervous glances, finally stopping at midday. Students bundled up against the November chill and streamed out of the castle toward the Forbidden Forest, pulled by a mix of morbid curiosity and school spirit. They didn't know exactly what waited for them, only that it involved the champions, danger, and that mysterious structure that had appeared near the woods. Arthur, unlike everyone else, felt none of the panic gripping his classmates. He took his time finishing a particularly difficult chapter on temporal enchantment theory in the quiet of his room before finally heading to the meeting point, a large tent pitched near the edge of the forest clearing where he'd spied on the dragons. He deliberately arrived last, finding the other three champions already inside, either pacing nervously or staring blankly at the canvas walls. Harry Potter looked absolutely green, fidgeting by the tent entrance. Fleur Delacour kept up her elegant appearance, though her tightly clenched fists gave her away. Victor Crumb brooded in a corner, radiating intense gloominess. Ludo Bagman bounced around them like an oversized, brightly robed puppy. As Arthur pushed aside the heavy canvas flap and entered, Bagman quickly spotted him. Ah, our final champion arrives. Bagman boomed, his boyish excitement completely out of place among the grim-faced champions. Cutting it rather fine, aren't we, Mr. Hayes? Arthur shrugged, totally unbothered. He noticed Harry standing slightly apart from the others, looking pale but definitely calmer than during their chat yesterday. The boy gave a small nod, which Arthur returned. Fleur and Crumb exchanged confused looks at this unexpected interaction, but before they could think about it too much, Bagman clapped his hands for attention. Well, now we're all here, time to fill you in. He beamed around at them like he was announcing a surprise holiday. When the audience has assembled, I'm going to offer each of you this bag. He held up a small purple silk sack from which you will each select a small model of the thing you are about to face. There are different varieties, you see. And your task, Bagman continued, will be to collect the golden egg. Arthur smiled at Bagman's pathetic attempt to keep the dragons a secret even now. As if all the champions didn't already know what they'd be facing. When the sounds of hundreds of feet passing the tent told them the crowd had gathered, Bagman opened the silk bag and offered it to Fleur first. "Ladies first," he said cheerfully. She put a shaking hand inside the bag and pulled out a tiny, perfect model of a Welsh green dragon. Crumb went next, his permanent scowl unchanged as he got the scarlet Chinese fireball. Arthur stepped forward calmly. As his fingers brushed against the miniature dragons inside the bag, he felt the distinct, sharp edges of the horntail model and the smoother shape of the short snout. He could easily pick the less aggressive Swedish dragon, but then he remembered Harry's panicked face from yesterday. With a mental shrug, what difference did it really make which beast he faced? He deliberately grabbed the spiky miniature. His plan would look more impressive with the fiercer dragon anyway. He pulled out his hand, revealing the tiny, perfectly detailed Hungarian horntail. It twisted in his palm, showing its tiny fangs in a silent, useless snarl. Arthur found it rather amusing. "The Hungarian horntail," Bagman announced, looking at Arthur with a mix of alarm and respect. "Rather you than me, my boy. That's number 4, so you'll be going last." Arthur mentally sighed. He hadn't thought about how choosing the horntail would put him last in line. If he'd given it a bit more thought, he might have picked differently. Going first would have let him finish quickly and get back to his research. Now he'd have to sit through all 3 performances before taking his turn. Harry came forward last, getting the remaining Swedish short snout. He looked relieved to be going first, probably wanting to get it over with quickly and give his wobbly legs a rest. "Well, there you are," said Bagman. "You have each pulled out the dragon you will face and know the order in which you are going to face them. Now, I'm going to have to leave you in a moment, because I'm commentating. Mr. Potter, you're first, just go out into the enclosure when you hear the whistle, all right?" As Bagman hurried out, Arthur turned to Harry. "Good luck, Potter," he said simply. Harry looked startled but grateful. "Thanks. You too, though you don't seem to need it." "I'm adequately prepared," Arthur replied with a faint smile. Fleur and Crumb were now openly staring at them, clearly wondering about this unexpected friendliness between champions. When Bagman left, Arthur transfigured a nearby chair into a comfy couch without any effort, then settled in to wait. He then summoned, out of nowhere, a small notebook containing his latest research notes on enchantment transference and began reviewing them, completely ignoring the tension around him. Minutes later, a whistle blew, and Harry walked out of the tent with shaky determination. Once he was gone, the remaining champions could only guess what was happening from the crowd's reactions and Bagman's excited commentary. "Oh, excellent move. Very clever use of flying skills. Narrow escape there, very narrow. That's some nerve he's showing. Yes. He's got the egg." Arthur allowed himself a small smile. He could guess what was going on outside. Harry had used the summoning charm to call his firebolt and was using his flying skills to outsmart the dragon. Unlike in the canon, where he'd had some trouble with the horntail, Harry should have completed the task quite easily against the somewhat less aggressive short snout. Next came Fleur. The crowd's reaction shifted: murmurs, then a collective sigh, followed by nervous silence. Arthur heard Bagman mention a sleeping charm and then a sudden yelp of pain. Ah, the snoring incident, Arthur remembered. A bit of fire must have caught her robes. More murmurs, then applause, polite, but less enthusiastic than for Harry. She'd succeeded, but not without getting hurt. Crumb followed. His entrance was met with booming cheers, especially from the Durmstrang lot. Bagman's commentary turned frantic almost immediately. Shouts about bold spellcasting and direct approach were mixed with angry roars from the dragon and worried noises from the crowd. Arthur recognized the pattern: the conjunctivitis curse. Effective, but brutal, and apparently clumsy this time. He heard Bagman mention damaged eggs alongside the retrieval of the golden one. Crumb had succeeded, but likely lost points for messing up the nest. Finally, it was Arthur's turn. The whistle blew, and he calmly closed his notebook and with a wave, it disappeared to wherever it came from. He then walked out into the arena with the same unhurried pace he'd used to arrive at the tent. POV shift, Ludo Bagman. From the commentator's box, Ludo Bagman watched in confusion as the 4th champion emerged. Unlike the others who had entered the arena with wands drawn and tense postures, Arthur Hayes strolled in as casually as if he were taking an afternoon walk by the lake. "And here comes Mr. Hayes, our final champion." Bagman announced to the crowd. Facing the Hungarian horntail, widely considered the most dangerous of our 4 dragons. Let's see what strategy he employs. The crowd murmured, a mixture of worry and hostile curiosity rippling through the stands. Arthur looked ridiculously calm, his dark school robes neat, his expression unreadable. Across the arena, the horntail shifted, its massive black form coiled protectively around a clutch of large, grey eggs. The golden egg glinted amongst them, deceptively small. The dragon let out a deafening roar, unleashing a torrent of fire towards the stands opposite Arthur, forcing spectators to duck behind magical barriers. Blimey, nasty temper on this one. Bagman chirped nervously. Now, let's see Hayes's opening move. What strategy will he employ? A complex charm? A daring transfiguration? But Arthur did nothing. He simply stood near the entrance, seemingly observing the dragon. Seconds ticked by. The horntail ignored him, focusing its reptilian fury on the noisy crowd. Any time now, Mr. Hayes. Bagman prompted into the microphone. Dragon's not going to invite you over for tea. A few boos started to rise from the crowd, mainly from sections packed with Gryffindors. Scared, is he? Someone shouted. Nothing like our Gryffindor champion. Arthur appeared completely unfazed by the jeers. He subtly rotated his right wrist, his fingers flexing slightly at his side, a movement so small it was almost invisible from the stands. Then, to the absolute shock of everyone watching, he began to walk. Not run. Not sneak. Not cast a single spell. He simply walked forward, directly towards the monstrous, fire-breathing Hungarian horntail and its nest, his pace steady and unhurried. What's he doing? Bagman yelped, forgetting his commentary duties for a moment. Is he mad? He's walking right at it. Hayes, get back. The crowd gasped together. People leaned forward, convinced they were about to see something horrible. The horntail was easily 10 times Arthur's size, radiating heat and danger. Its massive head, bristling with horns, moved slightly, yellow eyes tracking a bird flying high above. It hadn't even seemed to notice Arthur approaching. Arthur continued walking, his path taking him right beside the dragon's massive side. The heat coming off its scales should have been intense, the sheer closeness terrifying. Yet Arthur didn't flinch. He stepped carefully between the scattered rocks, moving with quiet purpose. He reached the edge of the rough nest. The horntail shifted slightly, its spiked tail sweeping dangerously close, but still, it paid Arthur no attention, letting out another roar towards the stands. It was utterly bizarre. It was as if, to the dragon, Arthur simply wasn't there. With impossible calm, Arthur stepped into the nest, carefully moving around the large, real eggs. He reached down, picked up the gleaming golden egg, and tucked it securely under his arm. The dragon finally seemed to sense something weird. Its massive head swung around, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air within its nest. Its gaze swept over the clutch of eggs. Arthur, moving with surprising speed for someone who had appeared so relaxed moments before, took a swift, long step back out of the nest just as the dragon lowered its snout to investigate. The horntail nudged its real eggs gently, sniffed again, and seemed satisfied. Seeing its precious clutch apparently untouched, it dismissed whatever brief disturbance it had sensed. With another defiant roar aimed at the noisy humans in the stands, it settled back down, ignoring the spot where the golden egg had been moments before. Meanwhile, Arthur Hayes, holding the golden egg, was calmly walking out of the enclosure entrance. He didn't run, he didn't look back. He simply walked away, leaving behind a stadium filled with thousands of completely stunned witches and wizards. I don't believe it, Bagman stammered into the microphone, saying what everyone was thinking. He just walked in? And the dragon, it didn't do anything to him? How is that possible? Arthur reached the exit where Professors Moody, McGonagall, and Snape waited, their own faces showing carefully controlled astonishment. He handed the golden egg to McGonagall, who took it numbly. A small, almost invisible smile played on Arthur's lips as he met the professor's intensely curious gaze. The confusion, the shock, the shattering of expectations that was almost as satisfying as the rare books he'd acquired. Sometimes, the most powerful magic was simply doing the completely unexpected. Chapter 26, Explanations and Evaluations. Even though Arthur hadn't even broken a sweat during the task, Professor McGonagall still marched him toward the first aid tent. Rules were rules apparently, even for champions who'd basically just gone for a casual stroll past a dragon. "Mr. Hayes," McGonagall said as they walked, her Scottish accent stronger than usual, "I must say, in all my years at Hogwarts, I have never witnessed such a peculiar series of events. Strolling through an enclosure with a dragon, a horntail, no less. Was simple and fun, though," Arthur replied with a shrug. "Indeed." She pursed her lips, torn between professional restraint and obvious curiosity. "Would you care to explain how you managed it? Because unless my eyes deceived me, that dragon acted as though you were completely invisible. And Confronting's charms are hardly that effective against magical creatures." Arthur gave her a faint smile. "If it's all the same to you, Professor, I'd rather explain just once in front of the judges. Repeating myself gets rather tedious." Professor Moody, who'd clunked up beside them on his wooden leg, let out a rough laugh. "Smart lad. Always save your energy." His magical eye spun around crazily before fixing on Arthur. "Though I too would be bloody interested to know what kind of magic lets a 7th year just walk past a Hungarian horntail like it's not even there." "I believe Mr. Hayes has made his preference clear," Snape said, appearing out of nowhere like he always did. "He wishes to maximize the audience for his inevitable display of intellectual superiority." Arthur didn't say anything back, but he couldn't help a tiny smile. Snape knew him well enough by now to know when Arthur was enjoying knowing stuff that nobody else did. The potions master swept away with his robes billowing out behind him, obviously deciding he wasn't going to give Arthur the satisfaction of seeming interested. Inside the medical tent, Madame Pomfrey was rushing around Fleur, putting some thick orange goop on a nasty burn on her arm. Harry and Crumb were nowhere to be seen. Probably back in the champion's tent, since they weren't hurt. The next victim? What is it now? Burns? Cuts? Broken bones? Madame Pomfrey turned, her exasperated expression shifting to surprise as she spotted Arthur. "Hayes? Well, I suppose I shouldn't be shocked. If anyone was going to show up unscathed, it'd be you." "Hello, Madame Pomfrey," Arthur greeted her with more warmth than he typically showed most staff members. "Lovely day for a stroll past a dragon, wouldn't you say?" The matron snorted, though her eyes crinkled with reluctant amusement. "Stroll, is it? The way people are talking outside, you might as well have stopped to have tea with the beast. Didn't want to impose. Dragons are notoriously poor hosts. Terrible table manners." Pomfrey shook her head as she approached him. "Arms up. Let me check you over." Arthur obliged, familiar with her examination routine after countless visits to the hospital wing following incidents with other students over the years. "No singed robes," she muttered, circling him. "No burns, no scratches, not even elevated heart rate." She stopped in front of him, hands on hips. "You know, Hayes, when they told me they were bringing dragons to Hogwarts, I stocked enough burn paste to treat half of London. I figured you'd at least give me something to do." "Sorry to disappoint. Next time I'll try to catch fire a bit, shall I? Just to keep your skills sharp." "Cheeky," she remarked, but without heat. "You're the only student I know who treats trips to the hospital wing like social calls. What can I say? The conversation's better in the hospital wing than in the Slytherin common room." She checked his pulse with practiced efficiency. "Well, everything looks normal. Too normal. Are you quite sure you didn't just apparate past it? Though Merlin knows how you'd bypass the wards." "Just clever application of magic, madam," Arthur replied evasively. "Perhaps those healing primers you lent me last term sharpened my understanding of avoiding injury altogether." She snorted, though a flicker of amusement softened her stern expression. Arthur had indeed spent loads of time discussing advanced healing theory with her, often asking questions way beyond the Newt curriculum. She was one of the few staff members Arthur genuinely respected, appreciating her no-nonsense attitude and deep knowledge. "Humph. Clever magic or sheer dumb luck," she conceded, finally satisfied he wasn't hiding some internal injury. "Well, you look perfectly fine. Not even a smudge. Honestly, you spend more time in my infirmary after fights with your housemates than after facing a nesting Hungarian horntail. Off you go then, before the judges think you've scarpered with their precious egg." "Thank you, Madame Pomfrey," Arthur said with genuine warmth before turning to leave. Snape was waiting by the tent flap, his expression impatient. "The judges await," Snape said curtly, turning on his heel. Arthur fell into step beside him, noticing how the potions master's pace was just slightly too fast for comfort, a subtle power play that Arthur found more amusing than intimidating. "Not going to ask how I did it, Professor?" Arthur inquired lightly. "I have little interest in juvenile showing off, Hayes. Though I will admit that whatever you did appeared to have been effective." Snape's eyes flicked briefly toward him. "And evidently beyond the capabilities of most wizards your age." "Most wizards any age, I'd wager." "Your modesty continues to astound," Snape replied dryly. As they approached the raised platform where the 5 judges sat, Barty Crouch Sr. leaned forward impatiently. "Severus, what are you doing here alone?" Crouch asked sharply. "Where is Mr. Hayes? Go back and fetch him. We need to score him and bring an end to the first task." Snape stopped, turning slowly towards Crouch with an expression of utter disdain. "What on earth are you talking about, Barty? Mr. Hayes is standing right beside me." The judges peered past Snape. Madame Maxime frowned. "Is this some British humour I am not understanding? I see no one, Severus." "Yes, hurry up," Karkaroff snapped. "I want to know how Hogwarts cheated and helped its champion in the task." Snape turned slowly toward Arthur, suspicion dawning on his face. "Did you do something, Hayes?" Before Arthur could respond, Dumbledore chuckled softly, his blue eyes twinkling as they fixed on the empty space beside Snape. "Quite a marvelous feat, Mr. Hayes. Such a powerful illusion. Is that what you employed within the enclosure as well? Rather brilliant." Arthur could tell his magic wasn't working on Dumbledore's formidable senses. "No surprise, really." With a resigned sigh, he snapped his fingers, and instantly the other judges startled as he seemingly materialized beside Snape. Yet, he had used illusion magic to trick the dragon. Drawing on techniques used by one of the most powerful mages in the universe, Loki, the god of mischief, Arthur had experimented with illusion magic and gotten pretty good at it. Not as good as Loki, but good enough to trick most people. "Good evening, everyone," Arthur said, enjoying their shocked expressions. "Having a good day?" "Mine, thus far, has been quite stimulating." Bagman recovered first, his boyish face lighting up with delight. "What incredible magic, Mr. Hayes! You fooled everyone. Never seen anything like it." "Yes, powerful illusion," Madame Maxime agreed, studying Arthur with new interest. "But surely that alone would not be enough to fool the senses of a horntail." "Correct, Madam," Arthur confirmed. "The primary illusion targeted the dragon's visual spectrum, rendering me effectively invisible to it. Eyes are their weaknesses after all. However, I also used secondary charms to mask my scent, suppress any sounds of movement, and nullify my body heat signature. A few backup spells were layered in just in case. One mistake and I would have been Dragon Barbecue." Dumbledore nodded approvingly. "You have clearly done your research and prepared meticulously, Mr. Hayes. Excellent work. Now, shall we proceed to the scoring?" Madame Maxime raised her wand first. A long silver ribbon shot out of it, forming the number 9. "Only a 9. Bagman whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. But he didn't get hurt at all. Next came Crouch, also giving a 9. Arthur suspected they found his performance too subtle, lacking the dramatic flair most wizards seemed to expect. Dumbledore smiled as he raised his wand, shooting out a perfect 10. Bagman, beaming, also gave a 10. He clearly appreciated the unexpectedness of Arthur's approach. Finally, Karkaroff scowled before reluctantly raising his wand. A 6 shot out from it. 44 points total, Dumbledore announced. "Well done indeed, Mr. Hayes." As they walked back toward the champion's tent, Snape spoke in a low voice. "Congratulations! You're in first place. You did not embarrass Slytherin House." "Above Potter?" Arthur asked, mildly curious. "Yes. Potter and Crumb tied for second with 40 points each. The Beauxbatons girl is last with 32. "Interesting." Arthur wasn't particularly bothered about the scores. The competition itself held little real value to him, but that didn't mean he wanted to come second to anyone. When they reached the champion's tent, the other 3 were already inside, waiting. They looked up as Arthur entered, their expressions ranging from frustration to grudging respect. "You were bloody brilliant, Arthur!" Harry exclaimed as Arthur entered, forgetting his earlier nervousness. "Absolutely brilliant! How did you do that?" "Hermione's been trying to figure it out, but she's completely clueless." "Magic, Potter, Arthur replied with a slight smile. Just magic. You did well yourself. I might be better than you at most things, but I reckon in a race on broomsticks, you might actually give me a run for my galleons. Well done, all of you. Bagman announced, bouncing into the tent with the energy of someone half his age. Now, just a quick few words. You've got a nice long break before the second task, which will take place at 9:30 on the morning of February the 24th, but we're giving you something to think about in the meantime. He gestured toward the golden eggs they'd collected. If you look at those golden eggs you're all holding, you will see that they open, see the hinges there? You need to solve the clue inside the egg because it will tell you what the second task is, and enable you to prepare for it. All clear? Sure? Well, off you go, then. Arthur immediately made for the exit, having no desire to stick around for post-task socializing. He could see a silhouette outside the tent, and from the looks of it, it was Skeeter. Muttering a silent disillusionment charm, Arthur made himself invisible and slipped out of the tent just as Skeeter zeroed in. He saw her trying to corner Harry, her quick quotes quill hovering eagerly. But Harry, perhaps feeling brave after his success or simply fed up, spat out a sharp bugger off. And practically sprinted away, leaving Skeeter momentarily stunned. Arthur smirked as he walked away unseen. Maybe Potter was learning after all. Chapter 27, Breaking Tradition. The aftermath of the first task was predictably chaotic, but Arthur decided to stay well away from all of it. He didn't even bother reading the headlines. He'd had enough fun with Skeeter, now it had become boring. His focus remained on the 2 rare books he had access to until the end of the year and his mission to witness the birth of Captain Marvel. Nothing else mattered, even the upcoming Yule Ball. The dungeon classroom felt even colder than usual as Professor Snape kept the 7th-year Slytherins behind after potions. The students exchanged confused glances. Snape rarely delayed them unless someone had completely messed up a potion, but today's class had gone smoothly by all accounts. Silence, Snape said unnecessarily, as no one had been speaking. He looked particularly displeased, even by his standards. I have an announcement to make. He practically spat the word announcement like it was a particularly disgusting potion ingredient. The class waited expectantly. As is tradition during the Triwizard Tournament, Hogwarts will be hosting a Yule Ball. Snape looked like he was reciting lines he'd been forced to memorize. This is primarily a formal dance for 4th years and above, though younger students may attend if invited by an older student. A ripple of excitement passed through the class, particularly among the girls, who immediately began whispering and glancing at potential dance partners. The ball will begin at 8 o'clock on Christmas night and end at midnight, Snape continued, his voice dripping with boredom. Dress robes will be worn. Anyone embarrassing Slytherin House with improper behavior will face serious consequences. That will be all, Snape concluded. Hayes, remain behind. As the other students filed out, the girls chattering excitedly, the boys looking various shades of nervous or disinterested, Arthur approached Snape's desk. Professor Hayes, Snape fixed him with a penetrating stare. As a Triwizard champion, you are expected to participate in the opening dance with your partner. This is not optional. You and the other champions will be showcased, for lack of a better term. I see, Arthur replied neutrally. I trust you can find a suitable partner and learn basic dance steps without embarrassing our house. I'd rather not have to deal with the additional headache of teaching you to waltz. I'll be prepared, Professor, Arthur assured him with complete sincerity. He would indeed be prepared, just not in the way Snape assumed. Snape regarded him suspiciously for a moment longer. Very well. Dismissed. Arthur left the potions classroom, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Prepared, yes. Attending? Absolutely not. Even before the Triwizard Tournament had hijacked his final year, Arthur had decided against participating in the Yule Ball. In fact, when packing for his final year at Hogwarts, Arthur had deliberately forgotten the dress robes mentioned in the supply list. He'd never intended to attend any formal functions during his last year. His plans for the Christmas holidays had been set months in advance, and they certainly didn't involve awkward dancing in the Great Hall. His unexpected selection as champion had briefly complicated matters, forcing him to check the official Triwizard rulebook, a dull but necessary task. He'd spent an entire evening meticulously searching through the magically bound parchment the Room of Requirement had provided after the first task. To his relief, while champions were strongly encouraged to participate in the Yule Ball, there was no binding magical requirement. Unlike the tasks themselves, the social events were merely tradition. Breaking them would be considered bad form and might generate negative press, but wouldn't violate the magical contract. Given that his reputation was already somewhere between dangerous outcast and arrogant manipulator, snubbing a dance seemed trivial. One more black mark wouldn't make a difference. His plan was simple: pretend he was going to participate, then quietly leave Hogwarts with the other students departing for the holidays. He'd deal with the fallout, the likely fury of Snape and the disappointment of Dumbledore when he returned in January. Over the next few weeks, as excitement about the Yule Ball reached fever pitch throughout the castle, Arthur stuck to his usual routine. He spent his days researching in the library, practicing advanced magic in the room of requirement, and working on his other plans. The dance wasn't even on his radar. "Have you got a date for the ball yet, Hayes?" Professor Flitwick asked casually after charms one day. "All sorted, Professor," Arthur replied with just the right amount of confidence. "Splendid. Looking forward to seeing you open the dance." Arthur merely nodded and continued on his way. Similar conversations happened with other teachers, and Arthur gave the same vague answers to each. In his experience, adults rarely followed up on such things if you gave them a confident initial response. What he hadn't expected was the number of girls who approached him directly. Despite his scary reputation and social isolation, his obvious magical power, sharp mind, and good looks apparently held significant appeal. A few brave Hogwarts girls tried their luck, stammering out invitations in nervous whispers. More surprising were the approaches from the Beauxbatons students. Several of the elegant French girls, perhaps intrigued by the dangerous mystery boy image or simply liking his looks, asked him to the ball with surprising directness. Arthur politely but firmly turned down each one, sticking to his made-up excuse of already having a partner. Their disappointed, sometimes annoyed, expressions were a minor irritation easily ignored. This pattern repeated throughout December: a respectful request, followed by his polite but firm refusal. Arthur found it vaguely funny that his social status had apparently risen due to his tournament performance. A year ago, most of these girls wouldn't have given him the time of day. As the holidays approached, Arthur made his preparations with typical thoroughness. He had already packed his trunk and added his name to the list of departing students. A subtle "notice me not" charm was applied to the parchment after he added his signature. Anyone checking the list before the train departed would simply skip over Arthur Hayes without registering it. The charm would naturally fade once he was safely away from the castle. The following morning, Arthur boarded the Hogwarts Express alongside excited first and second years heading home for Christmas. A few older students were also leaving, those whose families had planned trips abroad or had strict holiday traditions. No one questioned his presence. Most students were too wrapped up in their own plans to notice the solitary seventh-year Slytherin who had charmed himself to be overlooked. As the train pulled away from Hogsmeade Station, Arthur watched the castle recede into the distance, its towers dark against the winter sky. He wouldn't be returning until after the new year, by which time the Yule Ball would be nothing but gossip and memories. Days passed at Hogwarts. The castle felt emptier, quieter, yet buzzed with anticipation for the Yule Ball. Arthur's absence went completely unnoticed. He had no close friends to miss him. His solitary habits meant students were used to not seeing him for extended periods. They simply assumed he was holed up in the library, or his private dungeon room, studying or practicing magic, as usual. With no classes running, there were no registers to mark him absent. It was only on December 24th, the day before the Yule Ball, that the problem was discovered. Professor Snape, doing his duty as head of house, went to find Arthur to give him the final schedule for the champion's entrance and the opening dance sequence. He found Arthur's room empty. Not just empty of Arthur, but empty of his trunk, his owl cage, his books. All personal belongings were gone. "Albus, we have a problem." Professor Snape swept into the headmaster's office, his black robes billowing dramatically behind him. McGonagall was already there, discussing final arrangements for the Yule Ball with Dumbledore over tea and ginger newts. "Good afternoon, Severus," Dumbledore replied calmly. "What seems to be the trouble?" "Hayes is gone." McGonagall nearly spilled her tea. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean," Snape said with exaggerated patience, "that he is not in the castle. I've been trying to find him to go over the opening dance procedures, but he's nowhere to be found. His dormitory is empty, not just of him, but of all his possessions." "Surely you're mistaken," McGonagall said, setting down her cup. "The champions must attend the Yule Ball. It's tradition. That is, highly irregular. Arthur is not one to break school rules without purpose." "Minerva, could you possibly check the departure list for the Hogwarts Express? Dumbledore suggested, looking thoughtful rather than concerned. McGonagall waved her wand, and a roll of parchment zoomed into the office, unfurling itself in midair. She scanned the names of students who had left on the Hogwarts Express 3 days prior. Abercrombie, Boot, Brocklehurst, here we are. Hayes, Arthur. She looked up, bewildered. His name is here, Headmaster. But I checked this list myself before the train departed. I would have remembered seeing a champion's name, especially Mr. Hayes. I would have stopped him. Mr. Hayes is rather skilled at making people see or not see exactly what he wishes, Dumbledore remarked, his eyes twinkling slightly. I suspect he applied some form of misdirection charm to the list. But why? McGonagall asked, aghast. Why leave the Yule Ball? Snape scoffed. Isn't it blindingly obvious? The boy has consistently avoided any social situations throughout his time here. Why would he suddenly embrace one now, champion or not? But the tournament? McGonagall protested. Isn't attendance mandatory for champions? Is he not risking the magical contract? No, Minerva, Dumbledore sighed. The contract binds champions to compete in the 3 tasks, but social events like the Yule Ball are merely traditional. Young Mr. Hayes has obviously done his homework. He's been planning this from the start, Snape added. I should have twigged when he showed so little reaction to my instructions about the opening dance. Normally he at least shows some irritation when forced into social situations. McGonagall shook her head in disbelief. I don't understand that boy. Such a brilliant mind, but so determined to separate himself from wizarding society. What does he hope to gain? Perhaps freedom, in his own way, Dumbledore mused. Mr. Hayes has never felt welcomed in our world, Minerva. Is it so surprising he seeks his future elsewhere? Elsewhere? McGonagall repeated. Where would he go? What future could he possibly have outside the wizarding world with his talents? You'd be surprised, Dumbledore said mysteriously. Mr. Hayes has shared some of his aspirations with me. Suffice it to say, he sees opportunities beyond our rather limited horizons. Well, that's all very fascinating, Snape interrupted sarcastically, but we still have the immediate problem of a missing champion on the night of the Yule Ball. The Prophet will have an absolute field day. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed. We'll need to manage this carefully. Perhaps we should inform the other champions first, then prepare a statement for the Daily Prophet. As the 3 professors debated how to minimize the scandal of the Hogwarts champion skipping the Yule Ball, the subject of their discussion was already thousands of miles away, focused on a mission far more significant to him than any school dance. Chapter 28, Across the Pond. Long before Professor Snape discovered his empty room or Dumbledore realized a Triwizard champion had gone missing, Arthur Hayes was already putting considerable distance between himself and Hogwarts. The day after boarding the Hogwarts Express alongside excited first-years heading home for Christmas holidays, he had set his carefully planned journey across the Atlantic in motion. His objective was simple: go to the United States and implement plans to ensure he would know when Captain Marvel landed on Earth. This mission was the result of months of planning and consideration. A preliminary visit to the USA was necessary. However, traveling to the United States presented a bigger challenge than he'd initially anticipated, especially for a wizard. Normal magical methods were simply out of the question. MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America, had become practically paranoid about magical visitors after the Grindelwald incident decades ago. The chaos caused by that dark wizard, combined with an obscurus running wild in New York and Newt's commander's escaped creatures, had turned America's magical government downright hostile to foreign wizards. They'd created incredibly powerful wards against unauthorized magical entry, and getting approval for an international portfolio involved bureaucratic nightmares Arthur couldn't be bothered with. Bloody wizards and their paranoia, Arthur muttered, reviewing his options one final time from his manor. He didn't notice he was scolding himself too. Apparition across the Atlantic was technically possible, but only for extraordinarily powerful wizards. Dumbledore might manage it, perhaps Voldemort too. Arthur had only mastered apparition a few months ago when it was taught at Hogwarts. This was one thing he hadn't done self-study in and had waited for a proper teacher before trying. The risks were too high. Currently, his proficiency was good, but not leap across an ocean without splinching yourself into 1,000 pieces good. That left just one realistic option, a Muggle airplane. Pre-9/11 air travel was relatively straightforward, and as a British citizen, entering America for a short holiday wouldn't raise too many eyebrows. It wasn't glamorous, but it would work. Arthur booked a first-class ticket. If he had to endure hours trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky, he'd at least do it comfortably. He used his real name on the booking and no magical disguise. This was meant to be a simple reconnaissance mission, after all. The Boeing 747 rumbled beneath him as Arthur leaned back in his seat, ignoring the flight attendant's offer of another orange juice. He'd brought some newspapers and financial magazines, using the long flight to catch up on the non-magical world. He needed to be sure how far the world had progressed in this universe full of Marvel technology. After what felt like an eternity of recycled air, mediocre food, and cramped discomfort, even in first class, the aircraft finally descended toward Los Angeles International Airport. Looking out the window, Arthur could see the sprawling cityscape beneath him, so different from London yet oddly familiar, like a half-remembered dream from his previous life. This LAX felt smaller and more dated than the one in his vague memories. The terminals had a distinctly late 80s/early 90s feel, all beige plastic and geometric patterns. It was a jarring reminder that he was navigating a timeline still unfolding. The immigration process was straightforward until it wasn't. Arthur had just collected his luggage and was heading for the exit when two men in plain suits stepped into his path. "Mr. Arthur Hayes?" the taller one asked, flashing identification discreetly. "Agent Miller, FBI. This is Agent Johnson. Would you mind coming with us for a few questions, sir?" Arthur assessed his options quickly. Was he in trouble? Had some magic detector found him? He could use magic to escape a subtle confuse charm or perhaps a quick disillusionment spell, but that seemed unnecessarily risky. These agents appeared to be ordinary muggles, not magical law enforcement. Using magic here could violate the statute of secrecy and potentially cause more problems than it solved. Plus, if they were connected to S.H.I.E.L.D. or some other American agency with advanced technology, magical interference might only confirm whatever suspicions they already had. "Of course," Arthur replied with practiced calm. "Though I'm not sure what the Federal Bureau of Investigation would want with a British citizen on holiday." They led him to a small, windowless room containing nothing but a table and 3 chairs. It was a basic interrogation setup which made Arthur relax a little. It did not look like serious trouble. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Hayes," the shorter agent said, gesturing to the lone chair on one side of the table. "I'm Agent Johnson. This is Agent Miller." Arthur sat down, placing his carry-on beside him. "What's this about, exactly?" "Just routine security screening," Johnson said, his tone friendly while his eyes remained watchful. "You've never visited the United States before, correct?" "First time," Arthur confirmed. "And yet you've recently purchased a property in Beverly Hills. Quite expensive for a student, wasn't it?" "Ah. So that was it." His financial activities had triggered some sort of alert in their systems. Arthur had indeed purchased a mansion in Beverly Hills 6 months ago using a holding company linked to his investments. He had thought of it as a worthy investment with the stock market crash coming soon. "Family investments," Arthur explained smoothly. "My parents left me well provided for, and property in California seemed a sound long-term strategy." The questions continued for another 20 minutes about his background, his plans in the United States, his financial resources. Arthur kept his answers simple and consistent, sticking as close to the truth as possible without mentioning magic or his foreknowledge. "I'm pursuing several business opportunities," he explained when asked about his unusual wealth for someone his age. "My father's investment strategy proved quite lucrative, and I've continued expanding the portfolio." Eventually, seemingly satisfied, Agent Johnson closed his notebook. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Hayes. Enjoy your stay in California." "Cheers," Arthur replied, resisting the urge to add a sarcastic comment about the hospitality. As he left the room, he wondered whether S.H.I.E.L.D. might already be monitoring for unusual activity. The timeline was unclear. He couldn't remember whether S.H.I.E.L.D. was fully operational in this period or if they were that important enough without evidence of alien activity. The important thing was that they'd let him go. Arthur collected his luggage and headed outside to find a taxi. The warm California air hit him like a wall as he exited the terminal. It was so different from the perpetual dampness of Britain, dry and clear, with none of the constant threat of rain that characterized his homeland. As he slid into the back seat of a yellow cab, Arthur gave the driver the address of his Beverly Hills property. "First time in L.A.?" the driver asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Is it that obvious?" Arthur replied, not particularly interested in small talk but recognizing it as unavoidable. New arrivals got a certain look, the driver chuckled. Like they ain't sure whether to be excited or terrified. The driver continued chatting about local attractions, traffic patterns, and celebrity gossip until they finally pulled up outside an impressive Mediterranean-style mansion with high walls and an ornate gate. Arthur paid the fare, adding a generous tip mostly to end the interaction quickly, and approached the security keypad. The mansion had cost him a significant portion of his investment profits, but it was an investment that would likely triple in value within a decade. More importantly, it provided him with a secure base of operations in the United States for now. He could later buy another property in New York since that was where all the action was going to be. He settled down in his new home and after setting up some security measures in the property, first mundane and then magical, he called it a day. The next morning, Arthur turned his attention to the primary objective he was here for, locating Carol Danvers's imminent arrival point. His fragmented memories pinpointed a blockbuster video store, likely in a suburban area of LA, sometime in the first half of 1995. As he began his reconnaissance, however, he immediately confronted the staggering scale of the problem. Blockbuster wasn't just present in 1990s Los Angeles, it was bloody everywhere. A quick search revealed not 5 or 10 locations, but over 50 scattered across the sprawling metropolis and its surrounding suburbs. Driving past store after store, the iconic blue and yellow signs blurring together, Arthur realized that matching one to the hazy, fleeting image from a decades-old movie memory was practically impossible. Right, he muttered, leaning against the rented car he was using, gazing at yet another indistinguishable blockbuster facade. Plan B it is. Thankfully, Arthur had prepared for this difficulty. During his intensive study of the field of enchantment, he'd worked on something beyond just his diadem modification project. He'd also developed a series of specialized detection artifacts, small, rune-edged silver discs designed to resonate with unusual energy signatures. These detectors were highly experimental. Without actual cosmic energy to calibrate against, Arthur had relied on theoretical principles and obscure references to celestial magic found in the room of requirement. He wasn't even certain if Carol Danvers' energy signature would register as cosmic or perhaps space magic to his devices, but they were his best option. Right then, Arthur said to himself, closing his case of 24 silver detector discs. Time to get to work. He'd rented a nondescript sedan that wouldn't attract attention and plotted an efficient route to visit as many blockbuster locations as possible each day. At each promising location, he would discreetly place one of his silver detectors under shelves, behind ventilation grates, inside potted plants, ensuring they wouldn't be easily found by Muggle cleaning crews. A subtle sticking charm and notice me not spell secured each device in place. If any of them detected significant cosmic energy like a Kree-empowered human crashing through a roof, the master crystal he kept with him would vibrate and glow, alerting him immediately. By the end of the first day, Arthur had checked 8 locations and placed sensors at 3 of them. The process was mind-numbingly boring but necessary. As he drove back to the mansion, he reflected on the absurdity of his situation, a wizard using advanced magical techniques to track down a superhero whose existence was still unknown to the world. Days passed in this fashion, with Arthur methodically working through his list of blockbuster stores. Some days were more productive than others, but the routine remained the same: drive, observe, place sensors when appropriate, and move on. On the 5th day, Arthur found himself in Simi Valley, standing across the street from a blockbuster that seemed eerily familiar. The layout of the strip mall, the positioning of the store, even the palm trees nearby all matched his fragmented memories more closely than any previous location. This might be the one, he murmured to himself as he casually crossed the street, a detector disc concealed in his palm. With practiced nonchalance, he brushed against the exterior wall of the store, using wandless magic to affix the crystal in a spot hidden from casual observation. Something about this location felt right. Arthur placed 2 detectors instead of his usual one, for redundancy. Better safe than sorry. With the detectors deployed, his primary objective for the trip was complete. He had a few days left before his scheduled return flight. Figuring he'd more than earned a break after years of relentless self-discipline and study, Arthur decided to actually experience Los Angeles. He attended exclusive parties with introductions facilitated by his apparent wealth, enjoyed the vibrant nightlife, and generally allowed himself a brief period of carefree indulgence. It was a strange contrast to his usual monastic existence at Hogwarts, a reminder of the wider world and its varied pleasures. For those few days, Arthur Hayes wasn't a wizard, a student at a magical school, or a cautiously reborn soul with knowledge of future events. He was just a teenager having the time of his life. His worries about superheroes, villains, magical studies, and his place in the universe seemed distant and unimportant. The day before his scheduled departure, he descended to the spacious basement of his Beverly Hills mansion. He placed his expanded trunk on the smooth concrete floor, and with a flick of his wand, a large, ornate cabinet floated out, settling gently against the far wall. This wasn't just any cabinet. This was a vanishing cabinet, the same type used by Death Eaters to infiltrate Hogwarts in the canon. Arthur had acquired this particular cabinet from Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley a few summers ago. The shopkeeper, sensing Arthur's unusual interest, had initially quoted an exorbitant price. Arthur, however, had persuaded Borgin to drastically reconsider. He'd ultimately purchased the artifact for a fraction of its value. Since acquiring it, Arthur had spent considerable time in the room of hidden things at Hogwarts, repairing the damaged counterpart, reinforcing its structure and recalibrating its delicate enchantments. He had tested short distances successfully, and now it was time to see if the magic worked across continents. Taking a deep breath, Arthur opened the cabinet door and peered into the absolute darkness within. Without hesitation, he stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a disorienting moment, there was nothing a sensation of being nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. Then, reality reasserted itself. Arthur pushed open the door and stepped out, not into his LA basement, but into the familiar, chaotic clutter of the room of hidden things at Hogwarts. "Perfect," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. The connection worked flawlessly, creating instantaneous, untraceable travel between his secure base in LA and the heart of Hogwarts. After a moment to appreciate his success, Arthur returned through the cabinet to his basement in Beverly Hills. Now everything was in place. His detectors were deployed across Los Angeles, ready to signal Captain Marvel's arrival. The vanishing cabinet provided an instant transit method, allowing him to respond the moment an alert came through, bypassing all magical and mundane travel restrictions. All that remained was to return to London via conventional means, maintaining the appearance of a normal holiday. While using the cabinet would be more convenient, Arthur preferred to have official records of his departure from the United States. Future visits might not require such caution, but for this first trip, properly documented entry and exit seemed prudent. The next morning, Arthur took one last look around the mansion, ensuring everything was in order before locking up and calling a taxi to the airport. As the plane lifted off from Lax, carrying him back across the Atlantic, Arthur allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place. When Carol Danvers finally arrived on Earth, he would be ready. The preparations weren't perfect, but Arthur had a plan C to ensure he didn't miss this moment in any way, and it involved putting more detectors around Carol Danvers's friend's home, though that would have to come later since she didn't live in LA. With the vanishing cabinet giving him access to the USA anytime, he had ample time. For now, though, he had a different challenge to face, explaining to the professors why the Hogwarts champion had skipped the Yule Ball and caused them such embarrassment. Chapter 29, Unwelcome Return. Arthur entered Hogwarts Castle again after riding the Hogwarts Express back to Hogsmeade. Just one more term left before he graduated and could leave this place behind for good. He'd been expecting some sort of telling off from Dumbledore or the other professors about missing the Yule Ball, but he wasn't particularly bothered. He hadn't broken any actual rules, after all, just social expectations. Nothing to worry about. Still, his absence from the ball had caused quite the drama. Even on the train journey back to Hogwarts, he could see loads of students whispering and pointing when they caught sight of him. The Daily Prophet, predictably, had covered the story with its usual exaggeration and bias. Hogwarts champion snubs wizarding traditions, the headline had screamed, followed by a nasty article about how Muggleborns lacked proper respect for wizarding customs. Rita Skeeter had outdone herself, describing his absence as a deliberate insult to magical cooperation and evidence of the growing cultural divide between true wizarding families and those who merely borrow our magic. This incident had ensured that Arthur's reputation, which had been improving slightly after his impressive performance in the first task, had taken a nosedive once again. Now he received hateful glares from all the purebloods, especially those who had gone home for the holidays. It looked like their parents had given them a crash course on him and how they should treat the disrespectful mudblood. He entered the Great Hall for the welcome back feast, bracing himself for the usual wave of silent judgment and the familiar empty space that would form around him at the Slytherin table. He took his seat, ignoring the pointed stares, and began serving himself roast chicken. To his mild surprise, however, the usual intense scrutiny directed his way seemed somewhat toned down. While he still drew hostile glances, the main buzz of conversation throughout the hall seemed focused elsewhere. Listening closely, Arthur picked up fragments concerning Rita Skeeter's latest explosive scoop, something about Hagrid's parentage, revealing his half-giant heritage. Ah, Arthur thought with cynical amusement. Skeeter provides a new target for public outrage. It seemed Hagrid's misfortune was Arthur's temporary gain, distracting the student body just enough to lessen the immediate focus on his own transgressions. The wizarding world's capacity for fickle judgment never ceased to amaze him. He wasn't off the hook entirely, however. As he was reaching for a bread roll, a cold voice spoke directly beside his ear. Hayes. Arthur didn't jump, though the sudden proximity was unexpected even for Snape's stealthy approach. He turned calmly. Professor. The headmaster wishes to speak with you. Immediately. Snape's expression was thunderous, his normally pale complexion tinged with anger. Of course, Arthur replied calmly, rising from the table. Lead the way. Snape led him not to Dumbledore's office but to a small antechamber off the Great Hall, the same room where the champions had gathered after the Goblet of Fire had selected them. Inside, Dumbledore waited with Professor McGonagall, both wearing grave expressions. Mr. Hayes, Dumbledore began, his usual twinkle noticeably absent. I trust you had a productive holiday. Very, Arthur replied simply. McGonagall's nostrils flared. Do you have any idea of the chaos your disappearance caused? The diplomatic incident you created? The flagrant disrespect you showed? I didn't disappear, Professor, Arthur countered calmly. My name was on the departure list. I merely went home for the holidays, exercising the same privilege afforded to dozens of other students. You were expected at the Yule Ball. McGonagall snapped, her Scottish accent thickening with her anger. As a Triwizard champion, your presence was required. You were to open the dance. With all due respect, Professor, Arthur replied, maintaining his level tone, I made it a point to check the official Triwizard rulebook after my selection. While participation in the tasks is magically binding, attendance at associated social functions, such as the Yule Ball, is described as traditional, not mandatory. There is no clause forcing me to attend. This isn't about rules, Mr. Hayes, Dumbledore said quietly. It's about responsibility and respect. Arthur met the headmaster's gaze steadily. I understand your position, sir. But I had prior commitments that couldn't be rescheduled. What commitments could possibly have been more important than representing your school? McGonagall demanded. Arthur allowed a small, weary sigh. Professor, must we have this discussion? Headmaster, Professor Snape, you are both aware of my general lack of enthusiasm for many aspects of the wizarding world and its traditions. Attending a formal dance simply didn't rank highly on my list of priorities compared to other pressing matters. He paused, letting the implications hang in the air. Frankly, almost anything else would be more important. McGonagall looked momentarily speechless, shocked at his bluntness. But your future? Don't you realize the damage you're doing? Alienating influential figures, flouting traditions, you'll have no prospects in wizarding society acting like this. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Prospects, Professor? For a Muggleborn? Your optimism is admirable, but perhaps misplaced. While your warnings might hold weight for purebloods or even well-connected half-bloods, let's be realistic. How many Muggleborns truly secure influential positions within the Ministry or other established magical institutions? From my research, the vast majority struggle to find decent wizarding employment after graduation. Many end up taking remedial Muggle studies courses simply to find work in the non-magical world because the doors here remain effectively closed. So, forgive me if I don't see wizarding prospects as something worth compromising my own goals for. There is no future here for people like me. McGonagall opened her mouth, then closed it again, unable to refute his bleak assessment. The uncomfortable truth silenced her. Snape, who had been watching the exchange with simmering resentment, finally stepped forward. 50 points from Slytherin for insubordination and dereliction of duty as a champion, Headmaster. And detentions every evening until the second task. Dumbledore nodded slowly. That seems appropriate, Severus. Mr. Hayes has broken no explicit rules, but his actions certainly warrant consequences. I'll gladly accept the point loss, Arthur said coolly, but I won't be attending any detentions. As I haven't broken any actual rules, I don't believe punishment is warranted. Snape's eyes narrowed dangerously. You think you have a choice in the matter, Hayes? Indeed, I do, Arthur replied coolly. Expulsion holds little fear for me now. I am legally an adult wizard. I can keep my wand. Graduation from Hogwarts is largely symbolic at this stage. I could sit my newts independently at any ICW-approved center should I choose. More importantly, he added, locking eyes with Snape, as a magically bound Triwizard champion, Hogwarts is contractually obligated to host me and facilitate my participation in the remaining tasks. Attempting to expel me before the tournament concludes would likely incur significant magical penalties for the school, wouldn't you agree, Headmaster? I have, as you might have noticed, read the rulebook quite thoroughly. A tense silence filled the room. Snape looked ready to hex Arthur on the spot, but Dumbledore raised a calming hand. Enough, the Headmaster said, his voice weary. There is little point arguing semantics. Detentions would likely prove unproductive in this instance. You will need your time to prepare for the challenges ahead, Mr. Hayes. He fixed Arthur with a stern look. I trust this means you will be attending, and participating in, the second task. But of course, Headmaster, Arthur confirmed readily. Unlike the Yule Ball, the second task is explicitly covered by the magical contract I agreed to. I will be there. See that you are. Dumbledore's tone left no room for doubt. Very well. I suggest you return to the feast, Mr. Hayes. I imagine your return has generated some interest among your housemates. I certainly hope their interest isn't overly demonstrative, Arthur remarked dryly. I should hate to cause Madame Pomfrey any additional work so early in the term. Without waiting for a reply, Arthur gave a polite nod to the assembled professors and exited the antechamber, leaving behind three powerful magic users grappling with the frustrating reality of a student who simply refused to play by their established rules. The game, Arthur mused as he walked back into the Great Hall, was far more interesting when you understood how to bend the rules without breaking them. And even more interesting when you didn't care about the rules. Chapter 30, Preparations and Hints. With classes starting again, Arthur resumed his established schedule of lectures and research. Though now, one more activity was added to his already packed timetable. Almost every night, after the castle fell silent, Arthur would slip into the room of hidden things, step through the repaired Vanishing cabinet, and emerge seconds later in the basement of his Beverly Hills mansion. With the time difference, California was still in the late afternoon or early evening. This gave him several precious hours to work on Plan C, the backup strategy for monitoring Captain Marvel's arrival. Finding Maria Rambeau became his obsession. Carol Danvers's best friend and fellow pilot, whose Louisiana home featured prominently in his fragmented memories of the movie, would be a crucial piece in his detection network. If Captain Marvel didn't crash at one of his monitored blockbuster locations, she'd likely seek out her old friend, making Rambeau's home the perfect place for secondary detection spells. Tracking her down proved proper difficult. Military records were scarce and classified, forcing Arthur to employ increasingly creative magical methods. He spent several exhausting nights bypassing mundane security systems and carefully nicking data from restricted U.S. Air Force personnel databases. His persistence paid off when he finally pinpointed her address, a quiet rural property outside New Orleans, Louisiana. The journey to Louisiana itself became another challenge, flying to Louisiana while hidden, navigating unfamiliar territory, and setting up complex alert charms around Rambeau's farm without being detected by U.S. agencies or MACUSA wizards. The spells would notify Arthur instantly if anyone besides Maria and her young daughter entered the property, giving him precious advance warning of Carol's arrival. This intense schedule was taking its toll. Between attending classes, keeping up appearances at Hogwarts, studying his rare magical texts, executing his nightly missions across continents, and squeezing in maybe 4 hours of sleep, Arthur was properly knackered. But within a week, his determination paid off. Plan C stood complete and fully operational. Detection spells now hummed silently at key LA blockbusters and, more importantly, around Maria Rambeau's home. The waiting game had begun. Would Carol Danvers arrive next week? Next month? Would she crash through a shop ceiling or quietly seek out her old friend? The specifics remained fuzzy in Arthur's memory, but he was confident that between his California and Louisiana networks, he wouldn't miss her arrival. Arthur's interest in this single incident in the Marvel Universe exceeded anything back home. The Triwizard Tournament and the eventual return of Voldemort felt like nothing compared to this in Arthur's opinion. Compared to the cosmic threats and god-tier beings hinted at in the Marvel Universe, the Dark Lord seemed almost small fry. Back at Hogwarts, life continued. The second task loomed, still over a month away. Since Arthur already knew what it entailed, he didn't need to waste time figuring it out. He already had a plan that would blow everyone's minds again, and he could hardly wait to pull it off. He couldn't help but notice, however, the mounting anxiety radiating from Harry Potter. Without Cedric Diggory in the picture as a fellow champion this year, and apparently lacking the insight from Moody that Canon Harry received via him, Potter seemed utterly stumped by the golden egg's screeching clue. He looked increasingly stressed and knackered as the weeks passed. One dreary afternoon in late January, Arthur was leaving the library, his arms laden with books, when he nearly collided with Harry and Hermione Granger emerging from the same doors. Ron Weasley was conspicuously absent. "Hey, Arthur," Harry mumbled, looking up distractedly. "Hello," Arthur replied. "Had fun during the holidays, I assume?" Harry managed a weak smile. "Not really. Had too many things happening. Wish I could have skipped the ball like you did." "Seriously, how did you manage that? Wasn't it compulsory?" "Compulsory according to tradition, not according to the actual rules," Arthur replied coolly. "Have you not bothered to read the official tournament rulebook?" "Rulebook?" Harry looked blank. "No. Didn't find one in the library, and, well," he shot a dark look down the corridor, "the professors haven't exactly been forthcoming with helpful information." Hermione elbowed him lightly. "Harry. It's rude to talk about the professors like that. They're probably very busy." "Only when it involves helping me," Harry muttered under his breath. "Yes, the professors do love trouble seekers," Arthur said, his lips quirking into a half-smile. He turned to Hermione. "A pleasure to finally meet you properly, Miss Granger. I heard you stunned everyone at the Yule Ball. A pity I missed it. I'm Arthur Hayes, by the way." Hermione blushed slightly but met his gaze directly. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. It was nothing special, really. And yes, I know who you are. I've heard rather a lot about you." There was a hint of cautious curiosity in her eyes. "As a dreadful example of what Muggleborns ought not to become, I presume?" Arthur asked dryly. Hermione stammered, unsure how to respond. "Don't listen to that rubbish, Hermione," Harry interjected quickly. "Arthur's all right. He helped me with the summoning charm before the first task, remember?" "Only after you told him about the dragons," Hermione pointed out skeptically. "But he already knew," Harry insisted. "And how can you be certain he truly knew beforehand?" Hermione countered, ever the logician. Arthur sighed inwardly. This bickering was tedious. "Well, I shall leave you two to your spirited debate," he said, starting to move past them. "Do try to prepare adequately for the second task, Potter." Observing their dynamic, the easy back and forth, the underlying affection beneath the arguments, Arthur found himself mentally siding with the Harry and Hermione pairing over the canon Ron and Hermione. Even a Crumb Hermione pairing would be better in his opinion. The Bulgarian seeker, from what Arthur had observed during their few encounters, was an introvert with a fierce exterior. He seemed like a decent sort, certainly better than Ron. "Nothing spirited about it," Harry grumbled. "And don't remind me about the second task. I haven't got a clue where to even start preparing. That bloody egg just screeches." Arthur paused again, an unplanned impulse surfacing. "Oh? Haven't cracked the golden egg's clue yet? Tisk, tisk. Bit behind schedule, aren't we? You'll be in for quite a shock on the day if you go in blind." Harry stared at him. "What? You've already figured it out?" "Cracked it the night I received it," Arthur stated matter-of-factly. "My preparations are complete." "Show off," Harry muttered, though without real heat, mostly just frustrated envy. "Well," Arthur said, turning to leave again, "I do hope you manage to solve it. Though I strongly recommend you learn how to swim if you don't already know." Hermione gasped. "Swim? What? Does the second task involve water? The Great Lake?" Her sharp mind immediately leaped to the logical conclusion. Arthur offered her an approving nod. "A bright mind indeed, Miss Granger. But that's the only hint you get from me." He gave Harry a final look. "See you at the task, Potter. Cheerio." He walked away down the corridor, leaving Harry and Hermione staring after him, Hermione already muttering about mer-people and Grindylows. Arthur felt a flicker of confusion at his own actions. Why had he given Potter that hint? He hadn't planned it. Was it just lingering nostalgia for the characters from his past life's fiction? A sense of pity for the boy constantly manipulated by others? Or, a more unsettling thought occurred to him, was some external force, fate, destiny, nudging him to ensure the canonical events stayed vaguely on track, even as he forged his own path? He shook his head, dismissing the thought. His actions were his own. Probably. Chapter 31, The Second Task Part 1. February 24th arrived with a biting wind sweeping across the Hogwarts grounds, carrying the promise of more snow. Despite the freezing temperatures, an air of buzzing excitement gripped the student body. The second task of the Triwizard Tournament was upon them. Arthur made his way to the platform at the edge of the Great Lake early in the morning, his footsteps crunching on the frost-covered grass. Unlike the other champions who'd certainly be panicking over last-minute preparations, he felt perfectly calm and confident. He'd been ready for weeks. That was the advantage of knowing everything beforehand and preparing properly. The venue for the second task was bloody impressive. A massive wooden platform had been built at the lake's edge, stretching several meters over the water. Surrounding it were towering stands draped in the colors of the three competing schools. Mist rose from the lake's dark surface, hiding the distant shore from view. Being the first champion to arrive, Arthur had some time to himself. He conjured a simple chair and made himself comfortable, turning his thoughts to the one aspect of the task that still puzzled him. According to the Golden Egg's clue, the Mer people would be holding what you'll sorely miss. But who or what could that possibly be for someone like him? His first thought had been Mercury, his owl. That seemed the most logical choice. The owl was perhaps his only genuine companion at Hogwarts. But Arthur had taken precautions. 3 days ago, he'd sent Mercury away with instructions to stay far from the castle grounds until after the task. So his feathered friend was safe from becoming a hostage. As for her people, Arthur mentally scoffed. He had no close relationships among the student body. Not a single friend, not even an acquaintance he particularly valued. That eliminated the most obvious category of potential hostages. Among the staff, Madame Pomfrey was the only one with whom he shared a degree of mutual respect and perhaps even guarded affection, born from countless visits to the hospital wing and shared discussions on healing magic. But the organizers wouldn't be daft enough to take the school's only healer hostage, especially not during a potentially dangerous task. The only other possibility was Aurora, but surely the tournament organizers weren't balmy enough to kidnap a Muggle MI6 agent and stuff her underwater in a Mer people village? The diplomatic incident would be spectacular. Arthur almost wished they had tried, just to witness the fallout. That left, what? Some precious books? The thought made him inwardly cringe. While he valued knowledge immensely, being publicly identified as someone whose most precious treasure was a book felt embarrassing. He ran through the possibilities again and again, coming up blank. There simply wasn't anyone or anything conventionally precious to him within the confines of Hogwarts that the organizers could realistically take. He was stumped, an unusual and irritating state of affairs. Arthur was pulled from his musings by the arrival of the other champions and the tournament officials. The stands were now filling rapidly with excited students and staff, their cheers and chatter creating a racket that echoed across the water. Harry Potter stumbled onto the platform looking like a nervous wreck, his face pale and his hair even messy than usual. Clearly, Arthur's hint hadn't been enough to fully prepare him. He didn't blame the boy for a fourth year, finding ways to breathe underwater for an hour would be extremely challenging. The bubblehead charm and human transfiguration were far beyond most fourth year's abilities, and gillyweed was difficult to get hold of without a friendly potions master. Yet, Arthur noticed with interest, Harry clutched something in his fist that looked suspiciously like gillyweed. Dobby succeeded like in the canon then, Arthur thought. Fleur Delacour and Victor Crumb arrived next, both looking focused and determined. Fleur had her silvery hair tied back tightly, while Crumb's permanent scowl seemed even more pronounced than usual. Nervous? Arthur asked Harry casually. Bloody terrified, Harry admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Bagman bounded onto the platform, looking ridiculously cheerful for such an early hour, his canary yellow robes painfully bright against the misty backdrop. He gathered the champions in a semicircle. Well, all our champions are ready for the second task, which will start on my whistle, he announced, his magically amplified voice booming across the lake. They have precisely 1 hour to recover what has been taken from them. On the count of 3, then. 1, 2, 3. With the shrill blast of the whistle, the stands erupted in cheers as the champions leapt into action. Crumb plunged headfirst into the water, his wand pointed at his own head. As he entered the lake, his features began to change horribly, his head stretching into a shark's, though his body stayed human. The partial transfiguration looked painful but effective as he disappeared beneath the surface. Fleur waded in gracefully, performing an elegant wand movement that covered her head in a perfect bubble of air. The bubble head charm successfully in place, she slipped beneath the water with barely a ripple. Harry, looking nowhere near as graceful, frantically stuffed the gillyweed into his mouth, chewing desperately with a grimace. He waded into the lake up to his waist, looking unsure if the gillyweed was working, until suddenly he clutched at his neck, his face twisting. For a moment, he looked like he was choking, then he dove forward into the water, a flash of webbed feet visible as he kicked away. Throughout all this, Arthur hadn't moved an inch. He remained standing still calmly, watching the other champions with mild interest. The crowd, initially focused on the more active participants, gradually began to notice that the Hogwarts champion wasn't moving. "What's Hayes doing?" Bagman's amplified voice boomed, full of confusion. "The clock is ticking. Is he hesitating? Has the pressure gotten to him?" Confused murmurs rippled through the stands. Was he giving up? Had he forgotten something? Only after the other champions had disappeared from sight did Arthur finally start to move. With deliberate, unhurried movements, he conjured out of thin air what looked like an oddly shaped silver whistle. The crowd watched in bewildered silence as Arthur calmly walked to the edge of the platform and blew the whistle. The sound it made was unlike anything anyone had heard before, a haunting, high-pitched tone that seemed to vibrate through water rather than air. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, the dark surface of the lake began to bubble and churn about 20 meters from the platform. Suddenly, enormous purple tentacles burst from the water, spraying icy droplets in all directions. There were shrieks of terror from the stands as the tentacles, each as thick as a man's body, reached toward the platform. "Merlin's beard!" Bagman exclaimed. "Is that the infamous giant squid?" Indeed it was. The legendary creature, rarely seen by most students, had surfaced dramatically. Its massive tentacles stretched across the water toward Arthur, who stood perfectly composed, not flinching in the slightest as the glistening appendages reached for him. To the horror and astonishment of the crowd, the tentacles wrapped gently around Arthur's waist and lifted him off the platform. Girls screamed, boys shouted warnings, and Professor McGonagall half rose from her seat, wand at the ready. But Arthur showed no sign of distress. Instead, as the squid began to draw him toward the water, he calmly raised his wand and cast a perfect bubblehead charm around his head. The crystal-clear bubble formed just as the squid pulled him beneath the surface. The audience remained frozen in shock, staring at the rippling water where Arthur had disappeared. Dumbledore, unlike his colleagues, looked slightly amused rather than concerned. "Well," Bagman finally managed, his voice cracking slightly, "that was rather unexpected." Chapter 32, The Second Task Part 2. The transition from biting wind to muffled silence was abrupt. The bubblehead charm held firm, giving Arthur clear air and slightly distorted vision in the murky green depths. The giant squid, Hogwarts's most enigmatic resident, held Arthur gently in its massive tentacles, its colossal eye regarding him with what seemed like intelligent curiosity. It brought him closer, its beak-like mouth opening slightly, as if expecting something. "Right on time, my friend," Arthur said, his voice slightly warped by the bubblehead charm but still audible underwater. With a casual wave of his hand, dozens of fish appeared out of nowhere, a colorful mix of species chosen specially for the squid's taste. The giant squid's tentacles rippled with obvious pleasure as it swept the treats into its beak-like mouth. This exchange complete, the squid gently positioned Arthur atop its massive, dome-shaped head, just behind its enormous eyes. Arthur gripped the slippery surface with practiced ease, and without warning, the squid shot forward. It pushed itself through the murky waters with tremendous force, using its natural jet propulsion to cut through the lake at amazing speed. If the spectators above had been shocked by Arthur's unusual entry into the task, they would have been utterly gobsmacked by the sight of him essentially riding the giant squid like a living submarine. The squid wasn't just carrying him, it was actively helping, responding to gentle taps of Arthur's hand to change direction when needed. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment arrangement. Being perpetually isolated at Hogwarts had its advantages. It gave him time to explore the castle grounds and make unusual friends. The giant squid had first met him during early morning exercises by the lake in his third year. After the initial meeting, it kind of became regular. The giant squid was curious why a tiny human was running around the lake so early in the morning all alone. Over time, through regular offerings of tasty treats, Arthur had built a sort of friendship with the ancient creature. The squid was far cleverer than most wizards gave it credit for, able to understand basic instructions and even recognize patterns in human speech. Today's deal was simple: the squid would take Arthur directly to the Mer people's village and back in exchange for the special treats that Arthur had spent weeks preparing. As they went deeper into the lake, the water grew darker and colder. Arthur could feel the pressure increasing, but his bubblehead charm held strong, and the squid's speed made the journey surprisingly quick. They passed through forests of swaying weeds, past groups of grindylows that scattered when the squid approached, and over vast, empty stretches of lake bed. Within minutes, they neared the Mer people's village. Rough stone dwellings rose from the lake bed, decorated with paintings of Mer people hunting and gathering. Strands of glowing weed lit up the underwater settlement, casting an eerie, shifting light across the scene. Mer people with greyish skin and wild, green hair floated at the village's edge, holding spears and eyeing the approaching squid with suspicious yellow eyes. In the village center stood a large stone statue of a Mer person, its tail curled around a thick post to which 4 figures were tied with thick ropes of weed. A choir of Mer people hovered nearby, their haunting song now clear and understandable. "An hour long you'll have to look. And to recover what we took. Your time's half gone, so tarry not. Lest what you seek stays here to rot." Arthur's attention, however, was fixed on the hostages. 3 were immediately recognizable: Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and a small, silvery-haired girl he knew was Fleur Delacour's younger sister, Gabrielle. But the 4th hostage, supposedly Arthur's most treasured person, defied all expectations. He stared. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an object he owned. Tied securely to the statue, looking completely out of place and slightly waterlogged, was the patched, frayed, undeniably ancient sorting hat. Of all the possibilities Arthur had considered, the sorting hat hadn't even made the list. He wasn't sure whether to laugh or feel insulted. For a brief, rebellious moment, Arthur thought about ignoring the hat entirely and taking Gabrielle Delacour instead. Appearing on the surface in front of the audience with the sorting hat would be dead embarrassing, and Arthur couldn't help but cringe thinking about it. But in the end, his competitive nature won out. He wanted to win this task properly, ridiculous as his hostage might be. The Mer people shifted uneasily as the giant squid approached, raising their spears in a defensive formation. Arthur raised his hand in a gesture of peace and, to the Mer people's obvious surprise, addressed them in Mermish. "Greetings," he said, the guttural, screeching sounds flowing fluently from his lips despite the bubblehead charm. "I'm a Tri-Wizard champion, here for my hostage. We mean no harm." Learning Mermish had been a side project during his 4th year. With the help of Ravenclaw's diadem boosting his thinking abilities, mastering the complex underwater language had taken only a few weeks. He'd hoped to make friends with the Great Lakes Mer people, but they had turned down his previous attempts at contact, being notoriously isolationist even by magical standards. The Mermish chieftain, distinguished by a fancy necklace of shark teeth, approached cautiously. "The squid is not welcome in our territory," she rasped in Mermish. "The giant squid is here as my helper," Arthur replied. "We'll take my hostage and scarper quickly." The Merchieftainess stared at him suspiciously before nodding once, sharply. "Take only what is yours, surface dweller," she warned, "and clear off sharpish." Arthur swam to the statue, giving a wide berth to the Mer people guards, and examined the weeds binding the sorting hat. A quick severing charm later, the hat floated free. Arthur grabbed it, tucking it securely into an inside pocket of his robes before returning to the squid's head. "Thanks for your hospitality," he said to the Mer people with a formal bow, then signaled to the squid. With a powerful surge, the squid propelled them upward, accelerating rapidly toward the surface with such force that Arthur had to grip tightly to avoid being left behind. They rose through the water like a torpedo, the pressure changing so quickly that Arthur's ears popped painfully despite his protective charm. In what seemed like seconds, they broke through the surface of the lake, water cascading around them in a dramatic splash as the giant squid's tentacles rose majestically into the air, holding Arthur aloft for all to see, the sorting hat clutched triumphantly in his hand. Chapter 33, Aftermath. The moment Arthur was dragged beneath the surface by the giant tentacles, a mix of horrified gasps and shocked exclamations erupted from the stands. Students leapt to their feet, eyes glued to the bubbling spot where their classmate had disappeared. For several tense seconds, the crowd remained rooted in place, expecting something. Perhaps a desperate struggle, or a dramatic escape. But nothing happened. The water's surface gradually calmed, returning to its usual gentle ripples. "Well, Bagman announced uncertainly, his voice booming across the lake. It seems Mr. Hayes has, taken a rather unconventional approach to the task. He cleared his throat awkwardly. Champions have a full hour to complete their objectives, so please remain seated. As the minutes ticked by and the initial shock faded, the audience began to grow restless. An hour was a bloody long time to sit in the bitter cold with nothing to watch but a still lake. Students began milling about, moving between sections to chat with friends from other houses. "Blimey, I'm freezing my bollocks off," George Weasley complained loudly as he and Fred began making their way through the Gryffindor stands. "Might as well make this interesting while we wait." "Quite right, brother mine," Fred agreed, producing a small bag from inside his robes. "5 galleons says Hayes doesn't come back at all. Squid's already had him for breakfast." Before long, the twins had established a thriving betting pool, taking wagers on everything from which champion would return first to whether the giant squid would make another appearance. Several Hufflepuffs had started a lively game of exploding snap, while a group of Ravenclaws debated the theoretical limitations of underwater breathing charms. The atmosphere grew increasingly carnival-like until a cluster of daring third-years began daring each other to dip their toes in the lake. "Go on then, Parker," urged a Gryffindor boy. "Just to the ankles. Double dare you." The boy named Parker had just removed his shoes when a gruff voice froze him in place. "Put that back on, boy." Professor Moody stood at the edge of the platform, his magical eye spinning wildly as he surveyed the crowd. "Anyone who touches that water gets detention till year-end." His scarred face contorted in a terrifying grimace as he stumped along the edge of the platform, wand drawn. "Constant vigilance. There's a reason champions are doing this task, not spectators. You want to swim with the Grindylows, boy? They'll strip flesh from bone in minutes." Parker hastily jammed his foot back into his shoe, face as pale as nearly headless Nick. Moody's intervention established a clear boundary between the stands and the lake. A few additional stern warnings, and one especially creative threat involving transfiguring troublemakers into flobberworms, ensured that order was maintained, if not enthusiasm. As the waiting continued, Bagman tried valiantly to keep the crowd engaged with historical anecdotes about previous tournaments, but even his booming voice eventually faltered as he ran out of interesting material. Only 15 minutes into the task, a flurry of excitement rippled through the stands. "Look!" someone shouted. "Bubbles!" Indeed, the surface of the lake had begun to churn about 50 feet from the platform. Everyone leaned forward expectantly. "It looks like one of our champions is returning already," Bagman announced, his voice regaining its enthusiastic edge. "Too soon for a successful completion, I fear. Perhaps they've encountered difficulty? Who could it?" His commentary was cut short as enormous purple tentacles burst from the lake, rising majestically into the air. Clutched securely in their midst was Arthur Hayes, looking remarkably composed for someone who'd just spent 15 minutes underwater in the clutches of a legendary sea creature. For a confused moment, many assumed he'd somehow fought off the squid and was merely surfacing, perhaps having failed the task, as there was no obvious hostage visible. Most dismissed the soggy object under his arm as just a hat. Bagman, however, peering through magically enhanced binoculars, let out a strangled cry of disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen! I don't believe what I'm seeing." His voice cracked with sheer astonishment. "Arthur Hayes has completed the task in record time, less than 15 minutes, and it looks like he didn't even break a sweat." A wave of stunned silence washed over the crowd, followed by a smattering of confused, hesitant cheers. People looked at each other, unsure how to react. On one hand, a Hogwarts champion was clearly dominating. On the other, it was Arthur Hayes, the rule-flouting, tradition-snubbing Muggle-born Slytherin. The internal conflict was visible on many faces. The result was scattered, half-hearted applause mixed with confused whispers. "Is that a hat? Why didn't the squid eat him? Show off, innit?" Meanwhile, Arthur, having been gently deposited by the giant squid onto a solid platform of ice he'd instantly conjured on the lake water, gave the colossal creature a final, grateful nod. He projected a thought of thanks and promised more exotic treats later. The squid dipped its tentacles in acknowledgement before sinking back into the depths. Arthur turned towards the stands, taking in the muted, conflicted reaction. Beside him, the Sorting Hat, now free from whatever stasis charm had kept it dormant underwater, suddenly sputtered. "Well!" the Hat exclaimed, water dripping from its brim. "I certainly expected a more rousing reception for a Hogwarts victory. It seems, Mr. Hayes, your reputation is even more abysmal than I surmised. Understandable, wouldn't you say? Arthur replied dryly, carefully removing his own bubblehead charm now that he was safely on the ice. I did rather publicly embarrass their cherished traditions by skipping the Yule Ball. So, he held up the soggy artifact, you're the treasure I would sorely miss, are you? Surprise! The hat exclaimed with what might have been a chuckle. Well, the professors were breaking their heads on who to choose as your hostage. After days of discussion, they could not come up with a name. Too much isolation, don't you think? I thought humans were supposed to be social creatures. The hat's fabric twisted in what approximated a wry smile. Well, when they were utterly stumped and considering raiding your trunk for books or some such nonsense. Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. Books I might have grudgingly accepted, depending on the title. But had they attempted to rummage through my trunk, they would have encountered several layers of rather unpleasant surprises. And incurred my considerable displeasure. Quite, the hat chuckled. Well, just as they were contemplating that route, I jestingly volunteered myself. Boredom, you see, sitting on that shelf year after year. I thought a bit of aquatic adventure might liven things up. To my utter astonishment, Dumbledore took my joke seriously, and here I am. Just my luck, Arthur sighed. I cannot imagine what the Daily Prophet is going to write about me next. Hayes Fool's ancient artifact or champion's treasure revealed, moldy headwear. As if you care, the hat scoffed. Well, although I don't care about what the general wizarding public think, I don't want things going out to other countries or the Muggle world, Arthur admitted. There, I want to keep a good reputation. Well, perhaps you should have considered that before becoming infamous, the hat retorted sagely. Too late now, innit? Well, I'll take things as they come, Arthur conceded. Now let's leave these chilly waters. With that, Arthur began walking across the lake toward the judge's platform, creating solid ice blocks wherever he stepped to keep him above the water. The crowd watched in renewed amazement as he casually strolled across the surface of the lake as though it were a park pathway. Upon reaching the platform, the first person to greet him was Madame Pomfrey, who rushed forward with her usual mix of professional concern and exasperation. Arthur Hayes! She exclaimed, waving her wand over him in a diagnostic pattern. Must you always find the most dramatic way to complete these tasks? First walking in the dragon's den, now the giant squid. Would it hurt you to do things simply for once? Her voice was stern, but her eyes betrayed a hint of amused admiration. Scared 10 years off my life when those tentacles grabbed you. Arthur looked appropriately sheepish. Sorry about that, Madame Pomfrey. I promise to keep things normal for the next task. Normal? She snorted. I'll believe that when I see it. Now, are you injured? Water in the lungs? Any grindalow bites? I'm perfectly fine, Arthur assured her. But my hostage might need looking over. He held up the sorting hat. Hasn't had a checkup in centuries. See the patches? The tears? The colors practically leached out. The sorting hat somehow managed to look deeply offended. I beg your pardon. I am in excellent condition for my age. Over 1,000 years and still sorting students accurately, I'll have you know. Madame Pomfrey's professional facade cracked, and she let out a genuine laugh. Well, I'm afraid magical artifact repair isn't my specialty, though I could perhaps stitch up some of those tears if needed. Absolutely not. The hat protested. My battle scars are marks of distinction. Even Arthur found himself chuckling at the hat's indignation. Professor McGonagall approached next, her typical stern expression softened slightly by what might have been reluctant admiration. Mr. Hayes, she acknowledged with a nod. An unconventional approach, but effective nonetheless. She reached for the sorting hat. I'll take that back to the headmaster's office where it belongs. Goodbye then, Arthur said to the hat. I'll come visit whenever I have time. See that you do, the hat replied. Our conversations are the most stimulating I have all year. As McGonagall carried the still muttering hat away, Arthur settled himself on a bench to await the return of the other champions. Madame Pomfrey provided him with a warming potion and a blanket despite his protests that he didn't need either. Chapter 34, Rules and Rulings. Arthur had barely rested when the judges approached him. Karkaroff's face was thunderous, Madame Maxime looked deeply concerned, and even Dumbledore's expression was more serious than usual. Percy Weasley, apparently standing in for Mr. Crouch, clutched a thick rulebook to his chest with an officious air that screamed self-importance. This is outrageous! Karkaroff shouted, flecks of spittle flying from his mouth. Using lake creatures to gain unfair advantage. Hogwarts champion is cheating. Dumbledore raised a calming hand. Igor, please. Let us discuss this rationally, shall we? There is nothing to discuss. Karkaroff spat. This boy has made a bloody mockery of the tournament. Dumbledore turned to Arthur, his blue eyes twinkling despite his serious expression. Mr. Hayes, perhaps you could explain how you managed to enlist the giant squid's assistance? It's most unusual, I must say. Arthur shrugged casually. Nothing complicated, Professor. I made friends with the squid over many mornings while jogging around the lake. Once I knew from the golden egg what the task would be, I simply asked if it might help me. It agreed in exchange for a few treats. You are very resourceful, Mr. Hayes, Dumbledore replied with a small smile. Always thinking of unexpected approaches when I know full well you could have completed this task in much easier and less controversial ways. Arthur just smiled back. Where would have been the fun in that, sir? Madame Maxime's large, handsome face was set in a frown. This is unfair advantage to Z Hogwarts champion, Dumbledore. And is asking for third-party help allowed? My students would never think to communicate with Z Squid. Dumbledore turned to Percy. What do the rules say, Mr. Weasley? Percy straightened importantly, adjusting his horn-rimmed glasses before flipping open the rulebook with practiced precision. Right then. There is a rule that champions cannot ask help during the task from other wizards, witches, pets and familiars, and also cannot bring help from outside the venue. He looked up with a slightly pompous air. But the giant squid lives inside the venue itself, so technically it's within the rules. Bit of a grey area, that, but since Mr. Hayes is unharmed, it appears he hasn't broken any explicit rules. Thank you, Mr. Weasley, Dumbledore said mildly. He turned back to Arthur with a knowing look. You knew this already, I presume, Mr. Hayes. I've read the rule book line by line, Arthur confirmed, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. The creatures inside the venue can be enemy, neutral, or ally. I simply turned one into an ally. This is unfair. Karkaroff nearly shouted, his accent thickening with rage. First using a puny hat as hostage instead of actual people like the rest. Easier to swim up with. Now this unfair advantage. I object most strongly. I did not make these decisions alone, Igor, Dumbledore reminded him gently. You were present for all our planning sessions. I can hardly be blamed for Mr. Hayes doing his best to surprise us. Glad you liked it, Arthur replied with a barely concealed smirk. The judges continued their heated discussion as they returned to the platform, Karkaroff still gesticulating angrily while Percy consulted his rulebook with furrowed brows. Arthur watched them leave without any worry. He didn't think he would get fewer points since the people stricter for rules like Dumbledore and Percy would give him good points, and the rest might be convinced to be fair. He went back to watching the calm waters of the lake. Nearly 30 minutes later, just as the audience had begun to grow restless again, there was another disturbance in the water. Fleur Delacour burst to the surface, alone and clearly distraught. Her silver hair was tangled with weeds, her face scratched and bleeding. Several officials rushed to help her from the water. Gabrielle! She screamed hysterically, struggling against those trying to assist her. Ma so I must go back. She is still here. Miss Delacour, please, Madame Maxime tried to calm her student. Z hostages are perfectly safe. But Fleur was inconsolable. Z Grindylows, Z attacked me. I could not get past. Gabrielle is still down there. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, she broke away from her headmistress and rushed directly to Arthur. You! She said, grabbing his arm with desperate strength. You have returned so quickly please, can you help? Can you save my sister? Arthur regarded her calmly. Calm yourself, Miss Delacour. Nothing will happen to your sister, he assured her. The headmasters have taken every precaution to ensure the hostages' safety. Besides, he added, glancing towards the center of the lake, there's a certain knight in shining armor in the water who won't leave her alone. She'll come up safely, I promise you. The last statement confused Fleur so much that she even forgot she was anxious about her sister. What do you mean by this? Madame Maxime asked, her large brow furrowed. Harry Potter has what I call a saving people thing, Arthur explained with a slight smile. I would bet everything I own that if Harry reaches the hostages and sees some still remaining, he'll foolishly think they're in genuine danger. Only when he's certain everyone is safe will he return to the surface. Since he won't see you down in the lake, Miss Delacour, he'll almost certainly bring your sister up himself." Both women looked shocked by this prediction, and Fleur seemed to calm slightly, though she continued to stare anxiously at the lake's surface, her hands clasped tightly together. The hour limit expired with a loud magical gong sound that echoed across the water. A few minutes later, a splash announced Victor Krumm's return. The Bulgarian's shark head transformed back into his human features as he surfaced, one arm wrapped protectively around a confused-looking Hermione Granger. They were helped onto the platform amidst cheers from the Durmstrang contingent. Fleur's anxiety visibly intensified as the official time limit expired with no sign of either her sister or Harry Potter. Then, just a few minutes later, a disturbance in the water heralded another arrival. Harry Potter burst through the surface, gasping for breath, with not one but two people in tow: Ron Weasley and a small, silver-haired girl who could only be Gabrielle Delacour. They were surrounded immediately by officials helping them onto the platform. Fleur let out a cry of relief and joy, rushing to enfold her shivering sister in a tight embrace. Then, to everyone's surprise, and Ron's evident delight, she turned to Harry and Ron in turn, planting grateful kisses on their cheeks. "You saved Er!" she exclaimed to Harry. "Even though she was not your hostage." Arthur watched the scene with detached amusement, noting several entertaining social dynamics playing out simultaneously, Hermione fussing over Harry while praising his heroics, Krumm watching this interaction with poorly disguised jealousy before drawing Hermione's attention back to himself, and Ron's ears turning as red as his hair from Fleur's unexpected display of gratitude. Meanwhile, Dumbledore conferred quietly with the Merchifteness who had surfaced nearby. After a few minutes of discussion, the judges huddled together. Finally, Ludo Bagman stepped forward, his voice booming across the now silent lake. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached our decision," he announced. "Merchifteness Mercus has told us exactly what happened at the bottom of the lake, and we have decided to award marks out of 50 for each of the champions. Fleur Delacour demonstrated excellent use of the bubblehead charm but was attacked by Grindylows and failed to retrieve her hostage. We award her 25 points. Polite applause followed this announcement. Victor Krumm used an incomplete form of transfiguration, which was nevertheless effective, and returned with his hostage 5 minutes outside the time limit. We award him 40 points. The Durmstrang contingent roared their approval, stamping their feet rhythmically. Harry Potter used gillyweed to great effect. He returned last, well outside the time limit. However, the Merchifteness informs us that Mr. Potter was second to reach the hostages after Mr. Hayes, and that his delay was due to his determination to return all hostages to safety, not just his own. Most of the judges, Bagman continued, with a significant look at Karkaroff, feel this shows moral fiber and deserves full marks. However, after discussion, Mr. Potter's final score is 45 points. The Gryffindor stands exploded with cheers and whistles. Finally, Bagman said, building dramatic tension, Arthur Hayes demonstrated extraordinary resourcefulness, planning, and innovation in his approach to the task. There was some discussion among the judges regarding his method here. Bagman glanced nervously toward Karkaroff, who was scowling deeply. But as no rules were broken, and his performance was undeniably effective, we award him the same 45 points. The response was noticeably muted compared to the reaction for the other champions. A smattering of applause, mostly from professors and a few Slytherins, barely registered against the awkward silence from the majority of students. Arthur maintained his impassive expression, accepting the score with a slight nod. The lack of enthusiasm hardly surprised him. The third and final task will take place at dusk on the 24th of June, Bagman concluded, his voice regaining its characteristic enthusiasm. The champions will be notified of what is coming precisely 1 month beforehand. Thank you all for your support. As the crowds began to disperse, Arthur headed back toward the castle alone. The second task was done and dusted. Now only one remained, and he was a little excited to see how it would unfold. How would the impostor Moody deal with him and his unexpected ways while ensuring Harry reached the graveyard? This would be interesting to see. Arthur was also patiently waiting for his detection charms and artifacts to do something. He expected the Kree-empowered Carol Danvers to crash land somewhere in the next few months and hoped it would be before the third task. There were 4 months before the final challenge, plenty of time for the whole Captain Marvel incident to happen. As he walked, a slight smile played on his lips. The wizarding world and its petty competitions seemed increasingly irrelevant with each passing day. Soon, he would witness the beginning of something far greater, the dawn of an age of heroes and cosmic powers that would make even the most powerful wizards seem like children playing with sticks. Chapter 35, The Waiting Game. The excitement following the second task faded surprisingly quickly. The discussions about Arthur's unorthodox Squid alliance and Harry's heroic rescue of Gabrielle Delacour lasted barely a week before the Hogwarts rumor mill found fresher topics to obsess over. For Arthur, this was a welcome relief. With the final task still months away, Arthur resumed his regular schedule of classes, studies, and research. His work on the enchantment transference project attempting to move Ravenclaw's diadem's properties to a less conspicuous object was proving to be really difficult. This was primarily because he didn't have anything similar to experiment with, and with the preciousness of the magical artifact, he couldn't test his theories on the actual diadem unless he was 100% certain of success. The alchemical research, however, was progressing rather well. Arthur had reached the stages of transmuting one metal to another, though he wasn't yet capable of converting base metals to rare ones like gold. Vibranium and adamantium remained frustratingly distant goals. Days stretched into weeks without any alerts from his detection network in America. No sign of Captain Marvel's arrival, no unusual cosmic energy signatures. Even Hogwarts was unusually quiet with nothing exciting happening. Arthur continued monitoring patiently. By late May, spring had fully established itself across the Hogwarts grounds. The lake sparkled in the sunlight, flowers bloomed across the lawns, and students spent increasing amounts of time outdoors between revision sessions. The third task loomed nearer, but seemed distant enough that most students paid it little mind. On the evening of May 27, Bagman gathered the 4 champions at the Quidditch pitch after dinner. Arthur arrived to find the once familiar field completely transformed, though he had never actually watched a Quidditch match himself. Too much of a crowd for his liking. The flat, grassy area was now crisscrossed with small hedges, barely knee-high but growing in patterns that clearly suggested what they would eventually become. "Hello there!" Bagman called cheerfully, bouncing on the balls of his feet as the champions assembled. "Well, what do you think? Growing nicely, aren't they? Give them a month and Hagrid will have them 20 feet high." "Don't worry," Bagman continued, noticing Potter's crestfallen expression as he stared at the ruined Quidditch pitch. "You'll have your field back in pristine condition once the task is over. Now, I imagine you can guess what we're making here." "Maze," grunted Crumb, who looked distinctly unimpressed. "That's right." Bagman beamed. "The third task's really very straightforward. The Triwizard Cup will be placed in the center of the maze. The first champion to touch it will receive full marks. We simply have to get through the maze?" asked Fleur, flicking her silvery hair over her shoulder. "There will be obstacles," Bagman said happily. "Hagrid is providing a number of creatures, then there will be spells that must be broken, all that sort of thing. Now, the champions who are leading on points will get a head start into the maze." He grinned at Arthur. "Then Mr. Potter will enter, then Mr. Crumb, finally Miss Delacour. But you'll all be in with a fighting chance, depending on how well you get past the obstacles. Should be fun, eh?" The other champions nodded with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Arthur merely observed the growing hedges, trying to formulate a plan. Flying over might be the easiest method, but Arthur didn't know if there would be any precautions or rules against that. Memorizing the pattern would also be bloody useless since the hedges, if he remembered correctly, seemed to change their configuration as time passed. "Got it? Well, if there are no more questions, you can head back to the castle," Bagman concluded. As they left the Quidditch pitch, Arthur observed Harry and Crumb falling into step together, the Bulgarian apparently initiating a private conversation. Arthur knew what would follow. They would walk toward the Forbidden Forest, encounter the missing Barty Crouch Sr. who had escaped Voldemort's control, and set in motion the events that would lead to the man's death. For a brief moment, Arthur considered intervening. He could follow them, prevent Crouch's murder, perhaps even disrupt the Dark Lord's resurrection plans entirely. But the thought passed quickly. Crouch was hardly an innocent victim. As a ministry official, he'd sent many to Azkaban without trial, including Sirius Black. More importantly, Arthur had no interest in becoming entangled in the Wizarding World's conflicts. Let canon proceed as it was meant to and the Wizarding World deal with its own troubles. Arthur had his own destiny to pursue, and it didn't involve becoming a player in Britain's Wizarding War. A world he had no particular liking for. Let the canonical tragedy play out, it was Dumbledore's mess to handle, not his. He turned and walked back to the castle without a backward glance. The following days saw a noticeable increase in tension among the 7th years. The nastily exhausting wizarding tests, or NEWTs, normally scheduled for mid to late June, had been moved earlier to accommodate the third task. They would begin on June 1st, giving the champions and all other students time after exams to rest and prepare for the tournament's climax. The change of schedule created a pressure cooker atmosphere in the Hogwarts library, as 7th years from all three schools competed for prime study spots and reference materials. Even the typically self-assured Durmstrang students showed signs of stress, while several Beauxbatons 7th years were spotted weeping quietly among the arithmancy shelves. Arthur approached the examinations with practiced calm. His advanced preparation over the years meant that the material posed little challenge, though he had to be careful not to write answers that were too advanced. If the examiners required Newt-level answers and he wrote at a higher level, he might get marked down rather than up. Soon the exam weeks were upon them. The written examinations came first, followed by the practicals. Arthur breezed through charms, executed flawless transfigurations, brewed perfect Newt-level potions under Snape's grudgingly neutral gaze, aced the complex calculations of arithmancy, translated intricate ancient runes passages with ease, demonstrated advanced defensive and offensive magic in Dada practicals, and wrote comprehensive essays on herbology theory. There were also history of magic, care of magical creatures, and divination making up the complete set of 10 Newts. The exam period was taxing simply due to the volume of tests packed into 2 weeks, but intellectually, it was straightforward for him. Finally, on June 15, the ordeal was over. A collective sigh of relief seemed to echo through the corridors as the 7th years all removed their serious faces. Students emerged blinking into the early summer sunlight, exhausted but free. With the final task still over a week away, an unusual lull descended upon Hogwarts. Arthur allowed himself a rare day of complete relaxation on June 16. With exams behind him and the third task still more than a week away, he decided to spend the afternoon by the lake. Perhaps for the first time in his Hogwarts career, he wasn't studying, practicing magic, or working on a project, simply enjoying the warm sunshine while watching the giant squid lazily propel itself near the surface of the water. As he reclined against a broad oak tree, letting his thoughts drift, a sudden vibration against his chest jolted him to alertness. The master crystal connected to his detection network in America was activating. He quickly sat up, reaching inside his robes to withdraw the glowing, pulsing stone. The crystal's bright blue glow confirmed what he had been waiting for. Somewhere in California, one of his sensors had detected a massive surge of cosmic energy. The specific pattern of pulses told him which sensor had been triggered, the one at the blockbuster in Simi Valley. "She's here," he whispered, his heart suddenly pounding. After months of waiting, planning, and preparation, the moment had arrived. Carol Danvers, the future Captain Marvel, had crash-landed on Earth. A jolt of adrenaline, sharper than any pre-task nerves, shot through him. This was it. His first real opportunity to witness and gauge the power levels of the Marvel Universe firsthand. Rising smoothly to his feet, Arthur tucked the glowing crystal away. There was no time to waste. He needed to get to California, and he needed to get there now. The Vanishing cabinet beckoned. The collision of the two universes was about to begin. Chapter 36, The Arrival Part 1. The Blockbuster video store in Simi Valley, California stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its windows reflecting the glow of street lamps. At precisely 3:17 a.m., the silence was shattered by a blinding streak of light plummeting from the sky. The object, or rather, person, crashed through the roof with explosive force, sending debris flying in all directions. Inside the wreckage of what had been a display featuring the right stuff, a woman in a green and black uniform lay momentarily stunned. Captain Carol Danvers, though she currently knew herself only as Vare, pushed herself up from the crater her impact had created, fragments of ceiling tiles and VHS cases sliding off her shoulders. She blinked, taking in her surroundings with military precision despite her disorientation. The colors, the primitive technology, the strange arrangements of entertainment boxes all confirmed what she already suspected. She had landed on planet C-53. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Acting on instinct, Vare charged her fist with photon energy and fired. The blast obliterated what turned out to be only a cardboard standee of Arnold Schwarzenegger promoting True Lies. "Perfect," she muttered, glancing around to ensure no actual threats remained. Finding the store empty, Vare made her way toward the exit, where a security guard sat in his vehicle, staring wide-eyed at the destruction. His radio was halfway to his mouth, frozen in shock. "I need to use your communication equipment," she stated without preamble as she approached his car. The guard swallowed nervously. "What?" Communication, Ver repeated with forced patience. I need to contact my commander. There's a payphone, the terrified man stammered, pointing to a booth at the edge of the parking lot. Over there. Ver nodded curtly and strode toward the indicated device. She examined the primitive communications technology with growing frustration. How was she supposed to contact the Kree Empire with this archaic contraption? She picked up the handset, turning it over in her hands before focusing on the internal components. Perhaps she could modify it somehow to boost its signal capacity. From the shadows of an alley across the street, Arthur Hayes observed the scene with barely contained excitement. After months of planning and waiting, it was really happening. Captain Marvel, or rather the Kree soldier Ver, on Earth. The moment was surreal, like watching a movie scene play out in real life. Arthur caught a glimpse of his reflection in a shop window. His appearance had been subtly altered through transfiguration, facial features adjusted, apparent age increased to mid-20s, eyes darkened to an almost unnatural black. He didn't want his real identity revealed and tracked by intelligence agencies like S.H.I.E.L.D, and through them, Hydra and other villain organizations. For the next 4 to 5 days, he planned on being the mysterious mage, Merlin. Merlin, he muttered to himself, testing the name again. Bit on the nose, but it'll have to do. It was the best alias he could come up with. Hopefully, this was only the MCU universe and the real Merlin who existed in the comics wouldn't be offended by the use of his name. Either way, it was too troublesome to change it now. Arthur carefully planned his approach. This was his chance to make a proper first impression on a future cosmic-level hero. He'd rehearsed various opening lines, planning to come across as enigmatic and intriguing like characters in those web novels he'd indulged in during his past life. Something cool that would leave her curious about who he was. Taking a deep breath, he straightened his jacket, a simple black affair that he'd transfigured to look suitably mysterious, and stepped out from the shadows with what he hoped was casual confidence. "Hey there, visitor from outer space," he called, hands casually in his pockets. "Having a spot of trouble with Earth technology, are we?" Ver spun around instantly, her body tensing into a defensive stance as she assessed the newcomer. "Who are you?" she demanded, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Name's Merlin," Arthur replied with a smile he hoped appeared mysteriously knowing rather than nervous. "Bit of an adventurer, you might say. How long have you been watching me?" Ver asked, her posture shifting subtly into something more threatening. "Long enough to see you're having a right mess with that payphone," Arthur said, taking a careful step forward. "Fancy some help? Those things are rubbish even for us locals." Something in his manner, or perhaps his advance, triggered Ver combat instincts. He was acting too confident, nothing like the frightened security guard she'd just spoken to. Without warning, her fist glowed bright with photon energy, and she fired directly at him. Arthur's eyes widened in shock. Bloody hell! This wasn't how the scene was supposed to play out in his head. He barely had time to duck, the energy blast passing so close he felt its heat singe his hair before it destroyed a movie poster behind him. "What was that for?" he shouted, scrambling backward. "That could have killed me." But Ver was already moving. Before Arthur could properly regain his balance, she closed the distance between them with enhanced speed and delivered a kick to his midsection that sent him flying backward. He slammed into a parked car with enough force to dent the door, the vehicle's alarm immediately blaring to life. Pain exploded across Arthur's back despite the charms he'd hastily cast to cushion the impact. He groaned, pushing himself up with effort. This wasn't going according to plan at all. He'd expected to have a civil conversation first, perhaps impressing her with his knowledge, before maybe suggesting a friendly sparring match to test his abilities against hers. "Why did you attack me?" he demanded, wincing as he straightened. "I was just offering help, for God's sake." "My instincts rarely miss," Ver replied coolly, approaching with measured steps. "You're not ordinary. Who are you really? Skrull or their allies on this planet?" "I told you," Arthur insisted, "my name is Merlin. I'm human, completely human. Born and raised on this planet, thank you very much." Ver didn't seem convinced. She launched into another attack, a series of precise strikes that spoke of extensive military training. Arthur tried to defend himself, calling upon the basic martial arts he'd learned years ago at that London dojo, but the gap in their combat experience was immediately apparent. Where Ver moved with fluid, practiced precision, Arthur's motions were stiff and academic. He'd practiced forms and katas daily after his parents' death, but without a proper instructor or sparring partners, his technique had developed serious flaws. His magical enhancements at Hogwarts had always given him such an edge against bullies that he'd never noticed how inadequate his actual fighting skills were. A punch slipped through his guard, connecting with his jaw and sending him staggering backward. Only a hastily applied cushioning charm kept his teeth intact. Another strike to his ribs made him gasp despite the magical protection. For the first time, Arthur understood how those Slytherin bullies must have felt when facing him outclassed, overpowered, with no real way to defend themselves effectively. It wasn't a pleasant realization. "Is this how you greet everyone who offers help?" he called out between desperate blocks and dodges. "Or am I special? Because this seems a bit excessive." "You're unusually resilient for a person from this planet," Ver observed, landing another solid blow to his shoulder. "If my intel is correct, humans from C-53 don't get up after hits like that." Arthur tried to counter with a strike of his own, but Ver easily caught his wrist, using his momentum to throw him into a shopping cart. He crashed through it, scattering metal and plastic across the pavement. Despite his magical cushioning, Arthur was accumulating real injuries, now bruises forming beneath his clothes, a split lip bleeding freely, his left shoulder throbbing from what might be a minor dislocation. He'd severely underestimated both her combat abilities and how effectively she could hurt him even through his magical protections. "Bollocks," he muttered, spitting blood onto the pavement. "This is not how I imagined my first alien encounter would go." As he pushed himself up once again, Ver approached with professional caution. "Your resilience is impressive," she noted, "but your technique is amateur at best." "Who trained you?" "Self-taught, mostly," Arthur admitted, tasting blood. "Look, I didn't come here for a scrap. Can we just have a civilized conversation? I'm really not your enemy." "Then why are you here?" Ver demanded. "How did you know someone from space would crash at this location?" Arthur knew he looked suspicious, but he had to say something believable. "Saw something falling from the sky, didn't I? Went to investigate and found you. I didn't know I'd find an alien. Thought it might be a meteorite or some rubbish space junk." Arthur wiped the blood that was running from his lips with the back of his hand. "Look, red blood. I'm human, not some alien. Just a bloke in the wrong place at the wrong time." Ver narrowed her eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Maybe, but you're not a normal human. I'll get the answers I want after I've taken you captive." "You look too suspicious, too cunning." As Ver prepared to continue her assault, Arthur made a decision. He did not want to get beaten up anymore. Chapter 37, The Arrival Part 2. Arthur knew that his plan for a cool, mysterious encounter was in tatters. His attempt at gauging her power had turned into a humiliating demonstration of his own relative weakness in a purely physical fight against a true superhuman. He was still standing only because hidden magic was absorbing the worst of the blows. "Right then," he muttered, straightening up despite the pain. "Lesson learned. I need proper combat training." But enough was enough. He wasn't interested in being her punching bag any longer. His pride stung, and his initial curiosity had curdled into deep annoyance. He'd had enough of this unplanned, one-sided brawl. Reaching into his pocket, Arthur pulled out a small, multifaceted crystal, not one of his detectors, but a specifically crafted single-use artifact. He crushed it in his fist, feeling the magic pulse through his fingers. A wave of invisible, silent energy radiated outwards from him. Ver paused mid-strike, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as she felt nothing. But Arthur knew its effect. Anyone normal within 100-meter radius, the security guard, any early morning joggers or paper delivery drivers, would have instantly fallen into a deep, magically induced sleep. Any mundane recording devices, security cameras, traffic cams would have overloaded, their data corrupted. He couldn't risk breaking the statute of secrecy or having S.H.I.E.L.D. review footage of overt magic use. The area was now temporarily sanitized. He straightened up, wiping the fresh blood from his lip with the back of his hand. The battered, resilient facade dropped, replaced by cold, focused anger. His eyes, already darkened by his disguise, seemed to grow even darker. "Since words can't convince you," he said quietly, "I'll have to try other methods." "My turn." But before Arthur could move, Ver charged forward, fist glowing with photon energy, prepared to deliver another devastating blow. However, Arthur was done being her target dummy. Crack! The sharp sound of apparition split the air. Suddenly, Arthur was behind her. She felt rather than saw the kick coming, imbued not just with physical force but with focused magical power. It connected squarely with her back, sending her flying forward with far more force than his earlier blows, crashing heavily onto the hood of the same sedan he'd dented. She pushed herself up, coughing, staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. The disguise was still in place, but the power radiating from him was undeniable. "A mage," she breathed, realization dawning in her eyes. "We've got intel on your kind. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Never thought I'd actually encounter one." Her fists ignited again, brighter this time. She unleashed a rapid volley of photon blasts. Arthur didn't try to block physically. Objects flew seemingly of their own accord, a rubbish bin lid, loose hubcaps, chunks of asphalt intercepting the blasts with uncanny precision. Crack! He vanished again, reappearing to her left, another magically propelled kick sending her staggering sideways. Crack! He was behind her again, a pulse of telekinetic force slamming her against the blockbuster wall. The tables had turned. Where Vare had dominated the physical contest, Arthur's magic gave him a decisive advantage. Each time she tried to target him, he would vanish with a crack only to reappear elsewhere. When she fired photon blasts, he either dodged with unnatural speed or conjured objects to intercept them. "Not so confident now, are we?" Arthur taunted, feeling a twinge of satisfaction at turning the tide. "Ready to talk like civilized beings yet?" After several more moments of this frustrating, one-sided display, Arthur seemed to tire of the game. He stopped his teleporting attacks and simply raised a hand. Vare found herself completely immobilized, held fast by invisible bonds far stronger than before. "Had enough?" Arthur asked, his voice calm again, though his eyes still held a dangerous edge. Vare struggled against the magical restraints, raw power flaring around her fists, but the bonds held firm. "Never." She spat, defiant despite her predicament. Arthur sighed. "Stubborn, aren't you? Proper determined." He waved his hand again. The metal poles holding the streetlights warped and twisted, snaking down like metallic ropes to wrap around her limbs, tightening securely. Simultaneously, thick electrical cables erupted from conduits beneath the pavement, binding her further, pinning her on the ground. She was thoroughly, almost excessively, restrained. Arthur walked closer, surveying his handiwork, the alien super soldier bound tightly. She could barely move a muscle. He scratched his head, a slightly sheepish grin replacing the anger. "Right. Probably overdid that a bit. Sorry about that." He walked up to her and looked down at her bound form. "Ready to accept defeat and have a proper chat?" "Never." Vare snarled, struggling uselessly. "I would never accept defeat to a pervert." "A what?" Arthur's eyes widened in genuine shock. "I'm not a this isn't." He looked at how he'd restrained her and suddenly understood the accusation. His face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh, for God's sake. I had to be sure you couldn't attack me again. You pack quite a punch, and I really don't know what other alien tech or tricks you might have up your sleeve. Needed to ensure you couldn't retaliate while we talked." "Likely story, pervert." She spat back. "I'm not a look, can we just stop?" Arthur pleaded, suddenly feeling terribly awkward about the situation he'd created. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I really didn't come here looking for a fight. Honestly. And I know you need to contact your friends, superiors, whatever. I'm happy to help with that if you'll stop trying to blast me to smithereens." Vare glared at him, still straining against the magically animated metal. After a long moment, she seemed to deflate slightly, the fight going out of her. "Fine. Let me go. But stay well away from me. Deal." With another wave of Arthur's hand, the street light poles snapped back into place, the electrical cables retracted underground, and the magical bonds vanished. Vare cautiously pushed herself away from the wall, rubbing her wrists, never taking her suspicious eyes off him. "What are you?" she asked bluntly. "I told you I'm human," Arthur replied. "I am from this planet. Just, a different kind of human than normal. Some of us have abilities that most don't." "Like what?" "Teleportation? Mind control? Energy manipulation?" Vare pressed. "Something like that," Arthur responded vaguely. "Look, we're not so different. You've got your photon blasts, I've got my talents." Vare turned back toward the payphone without responding, apparently deciding to ignore him in favor of her original mission. While she examined the communication device again, Arthur began quietly repairing the damage their fight had caused. With subtle gestures and whispered reparo spells, he mended the dented cars, restored the scattered shopping carts, and fixed the cracked pavement. Within minutes, the parking lot looked almost untouched, save for the gaping hole in the blockbuster roof that he left alone. That was not his doing, and he wasn't about to repair damage he hadn't caused. "That's useful," Vere commented, having turned to observe his work. Her tone was still guarded but held a hint of genuine curiosity. "Comes in handy," Arthur admitted with a small shrug. "Especially after impromptu battles with aliens." "Are there many like you on this planet?" she asked, her suspicion clearly not fully dispelled. "Some," Arthur admitted carefully. "We keep to ourselves, mostly. Not everyone appreciates people who are different." "Why did you seek me out?" she asked, her gaze direct and penetrating. Arthur considered his answer carefully. He couldn't tell her the truth that he knew exactly who she was and would become. That he'd been monitoring for her arrival for months. "I detected your arrival," he said instead. "I was curious about the visitor from space. That's all. Our planet hasn't exactly mastered interstellar travel yet, so meeting someone from another world is rather extraordinary." "Which planet are you from? You look human apart from the photon beams." Vere's expression became guarded again. "I'm in no mood for a chat. I've been through enough the past few days. Let me contact my commander first." "Fair enough," Arthur conceded. "Take your time. I'll be here if you have any questions." He hesitated, then added, "Just, don't mention me to your people over the phone, yet? My lot likes to keep a low profile, and you never know who might be listening. I'd rather not have to stop you if you try." The implied threat wasn't lost on Vere, who gave him a cold look. "Is that so?" "It's not a threat," Arthur clarified quickly. "Just a request. I'm not supposed to reveal what I am to, well, anyone. There are rules." Vere didn't look convinced, but she turned back to the payphone, clearly prioritizing her mission over this strange encounter. She began examining the internal components of the device again, trying to figure out how to modify it for interstellar communication. Arthur leaned against a nearby wall, wincing slightly as his bruised body protested. The encounter hadn't gone at all as he'd planned, but at least they'd reached a tentative truce. As he watched her work, he couldn't help but smile grimly to himself. His first meeting with a Marvel superhero had taught him a valuable lesson. He had a long way to go before he'd be ready to play in the big leagues. "Welcome home, Carol Danvers," he muttered under his breath, though not loudly enough for her to hear. Chapter 38, Fragments of a Forgotten Past. Vere studied the partially disassembled payphone, her fingers working with practiced precision despite the primitive technology. Meanwhile, Arthur stood a few feet away, tending to his injuries. Every few seconds, flashes of white light emanated from his hands as the wounds she had inflicted on the mage gradually healed. After casting the last healing spell, Arthur moved his joints with satisfaction. "Bloody brilliant," he muttered, relief evident in his voice. "No more pain." He briefly considered offering Vere healing but quickly dismissed the thought she had barely a scratch from their fight. The beating he'd managed to give her hadn't penetrated her superhuman defenses. The only reason he'd won was his ability to subdue her with magic. Minutes ticked by as Vere finally managed to establish a connection to Yanrog and the other Kree using the modified payphone. Arthur observed quietly from nearby, baffled by how Earth technology could possibly connect to a Kree planet or spaceship millions of light-years away. It simply didn't make sense to him. Perhaps Tony Stark would have an explanation, but to Arthur, it seemed like a glaring plot hole in the universe's logic. After a moment of static, the connection stabilized. "Vere." A voice came through with only minimal distortion. Arthur assumed this was Yanrog, Vere's mentor and commander. After brief verifications, Yanrog continued, "Is everyone okay? What happened?" "Skrull ambush," Vere replied tersely. "I thought we'd lost you. Did you find Solar?" Concern was evident in Yanrog's voice. "It wasn't Solar," she explained. "Talos simmed him. Even knew his code." "That's impossible," Yanrog sounded genuinely surprised. "That code was buried in his unconscious." "The Skrulls messed with my mind," Vere continued, touching her temple unconsciously. "The machine that they used. I think it's how they extracted Solar's code." "Vere, where are you?" "I'm on planet C-53, she replied, momentarily hesitating as she felt Arthur's watchful gaze. That brief pause was subtle but noticeable, yet she kept her voice steady, determined not to mention the mage as promised. The Skrulls are looking for someone named Lawson, she continued, trying to focus solely on her mission and not the strange mage observing her call. Who? Yanrog questioned. Ver hesitated again, longer this time. She's who I see. She began, thinking of her recurring dreams. She caught herself, realizing what she was admitting. She's what? Yanrog pressed when she didn't immediately continue. Ver. She's a scientist, Ver recovered quickly. They think that she's cracked the code on lightspeed tech. I have to get to her before they do, or else they'll be able to invade new galaxies. No, Yanrog commanded. You've been caught once already. How far is C-53? A voice in the background responded, closest jump point is 22 hours. Ver, hold your position until we get there, Yanrog instructed. Keep your comms online so we can contact you. No. What if they get a hold of it before Ver began to protest, but the connection suddenly cut out. A long-distance company access code is required for the number you have dialed, an automated voice announced from the payphone. Yanrog. Ver called, frustration evident in her voice as she futilely jabbed at the buttons. Light years away aboard the Helion, Yanrog's expression darkened as the communication cut off. Ver. He called again, uselessly. Ver. He turned to face the others gathered in the command center: Minerva, Korath, and several other Kree officers. If the Skrulls got to her, she's compromised, Korath stated matter-of-factly, his face impassive. She's stronger than you think, Yanrog defended immediately, though a flicker of doubt crossed his features. Those hesitations were telling, Minerva observed, her blue-skinned face emotionless but her eyes sharp with suspicion. She's hiding something. She mentioned seeing this Lawson in her mind, another officer noted. What if she's remembering? The blocks might be failing. The Supreme Intelligence's work is flawless, Yanrog insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. Is it? Minerva challenged quietly. She's on her home world now. The familiarity alone could trigger memories. She's a weapon, Korath stated coldly. A weapon that may be malfunctioning. Silence fell over the group until Yanrog spoke again, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. We continue as planned. I will not abandon her based on mere suspicion. Then you'd better hope your faith is justified, Minerva muttered, but quietly enough that Yanrog could pretend not to hear. Back on Earth, Arthur watched as Ver struggled with the now disconnected phone, pounding it in frustration. You kept your word, he noted, approaching now that her call was finished. Didn't mention me. Appreciate that. Ver glanced at him, her expression guarded. I keep my promises. Arthur nodded, pleased with this development. He'd wanted to keep the existence of wizards a secret from the Kree and whoever else might be listening in on the call. It could have potentially derailed the plot, and the Kree might have arrived in greater force to fight what they perceived as a new threat. I couldn't help but overhear something, he said casually, leaning against the wall near the payphone. This Lawson you mentioned, you see her? Like, in visions. Ver stiffened. That's none of your business. Perhaps not, Arthur conceded. But I might be able to help you out. Dreams can be rather significant, especially recurring ones. Bit of a specialty of mine, if I'm honest. Ver studied him skeptically. Despite their earlier fight, something about this strange mage intrigued her. There was a knowing look in his eyes that suggested he understood more than he was letting on and could help her solve the mysteries plaguing her mind. Why would you want to help me? She asked cautiously. Professional curiosity, Arthur replied with a shrug. And perhaps a bit of an apology for how our introduction went. I didn't come looking for a brawl, you know. I would very much fancy making an alien friend. Not exactly something that happens every day, is it? Ver hesitated, then surprisingly found herself speaking. I have these dreams, fragments of a life I don't remember. A woman named Lawson keeps appearing. Places I've never been. She paused, surprised at her own openness. My commander says they're just dreams, but they feel real. Arthur's eyes lit up with interest. What sort of places? Can you describe what you see? Ver carefully explained the fragments she saw in her dreams, flashes of a bar with pilots, a desert facility, a plane crash, and a woman with kind eyes who seemed important to her. Arthur listened intently with a knowing look. He knew everything about her past but had to act in a way that would seem believable to Ver. Those sound like more than ordinary dreams. In my experience, such vivid recurring dreams typically fall into one of three categories: prophetic visions of the future, tampered memories trying to reassert themselves, or forgotten memories resurfacing. Which do you think it is? Vare asked, her voice quieter now. Arthur considered carefully before responding. Have you lost memories before? Any form of amnesia, perhaps? Vare looked startled by the question. How did you know that? Just an educated guess, Arthur replied with a small smile. Am I right, then? After a moment's hesitation, Vare nodded. I only have about 6 years' worth of memories. My commander told me I lost everything before that during a battle with the Skrulls. He said I was severely injured, that the enemy did something to my mind. Arthur nodded thoughtfully, pretending to piece it together. Then it's almost certainly the third option, your original memories trying to resurface. Your dreams aren't just dreams, they're fragments of your past breaking through whatever's blocking them. Quite extraordinary, really. Vare fell silent, processing this information. It aligned with what she'd begun to suspect, but hearing it stated so plainly was unsettling. I could help you, you know, Arthur offered after giving her a moment. We wizards have techniques for accessing and reading memories. I could potentially help you recover what you've lost, or at least confirm whether these dreams are genuine memories. Wouldn't take but a moment. No, Vare replied quickly, too quickly. I don't want anyone in my head. Arthur raised his hands in a placating gesture. Just an offer. Your mind is your own. But a bit of advice, though you should view whatever your commander says with a healthy dose of suspicion. They're definitely hiding something from you. Trust me on that. Vare opened her mouth to ask something, but before she could speak, the distant wail of sirens caught their attention. Arthur glanced down the street to see flashing lights approaching several police cars and black government vehicles that could only mean one thing: S.H.I.E.L.D. Ah, that's my cue to Scarper, he said, straightening up. This planet's authorities. I'd rather not deal with men in suits if it's all the same to you. I value my anonymity, see. Vare looked toward the approaching vehicles, then back to Arthur. You're just leaving. For now, he confirmed with a slight bow. But I'll find you again once you've given these new blokes the slip. You're going to have questions, and I might have some answers. He stepped back into the shadows between buildings. See you later. Good luck. With a final nod, he melted back into the darkness, using a silent disillusionment charm just as the first police car screeched to a halt in the parking lot. Vare was left alone, facing a new set of unknowns, the strange encounter with the mage adding another layer of complexity to her already fractured reality. Chapter 39, Pursuit. After watching the mage Merlin disappear, Vare ignored the approaching vehicles and continued working on the payphone. She had suspicions that needed answers, and a broken connection wasn't going to stop her. A tall man in a dark suit emerged from one of the black government vehicles, his expression stern beneath a receding hairline. He approached the Blockbuster store, surveying the damage with professional interest, before noticing Vare standing by the payphone. Excuse me, miss, he called out, approaching with confident strides. Vare ignored the newcomer. Unlike Arthur, she wasn't afraid of Earth authorities. You know anything about a lady blowing a hole through the roof of that Blockbuster over there? The agent asked, gesturing toward the damaged building. Witness says she was dressed for laser tag. Vare assessed him quickly, deciding he wasn't a threat worth worrying about. Oh, yeah, I think she went that way, she replied, pointing vaguely down the street. I'd like to ask you some questions, the man continued, clearly not buying her deflection. Maybe give you the 411 on the late-night drop box. He pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open to reveal his identification. Agent Fury, Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. Could I see some identification, please? Vare. Kree Star Force, she replied matter-of-factly. We don't carry identification on little cards. Fury blinked, clearly taken aback. Vare. He repeated slowly. Star Force. He sounded utterly incredulous. How long do you plan to be in town? Fury asked, clearly trying to make sense of her strange answers while maintaining his professional composure. Oh, I'll be out of your hair as soon as I track down the Skrulls that are infiltrating your planet, Vare answered honestly, seeing no reason to hide her mission from this clearly clueless local authority. Skrulls? Fury echoed, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Shapeshifters, Vare explained patiently. They can transform into any life form down to the DNA. Seeing his continued confusion, Ver sighed. Oh, boy. You guys don't have any clue, do you? Fury decided to play along. How do we know you're not one of those shapeshifters? Ver couldn't help but be slightly impressed. Congratulations, Agent Fury. You have finally asked a relevant question. No, congratulations to you, Star Force Lady, Fury shot back, his professional demeanor hardening. You're under arrest. As Agent Fury moved to detain her, Ver remained perfectly calm, ready to swat him aside like an annoying insect. She saw no threat from these newcomers. They were weak. Nothing like the mage who had defeated her earlier. However, before either of them could act, energy blasts suddenly rained down from a nearby rooftop, impacting the pavement near them with explosive force, sending shards of asphalt flying. What the hell? Fury yelled, instinctively diving for cover behind his sedan and drawing his standard-issue handgun. Ver reacted instantly, her combat training overriding everything else. She pinpointed the source, a figure in a wetsuit on the roof, wielding a distinctive Skrull energy rifle. Not a human, but a Skrull in disguise. Stay down! She yelled at Fury, already sprinting towards the building, ignoring his shouts. The Skrull fired several more blasts before retreating across the rooftops. Ver pursued relentlessly, her enhanced physiology allowing her to scale the building's exterior in seconds. Ver chased the fleeing Skrull through the streets, leaving a baffled Fury behind. The chase led to a train station where the shapeshifter, desperate to escape, transformed into an elderly woman and slipped aboard a departing train. Without hesitation, Ver leapt aboard just as the doors were closing. The train pulled away from the station, carrying both hunter and hunted into the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the crowded commuter car, Ver scanned the passengers, her eyes eventually settling on an elderly woman with a shopping bag. She frowned, remembering that she had seen the same old woman leave the train just a few seconds ago. Without warning, Ver punched her in the face. The facade dropped instantly, the grandmother launching herself at Ver with inhuman strength. Passengers screamed and scattered to the edges of the car as the two combatants crashed through the train's interior. What followed was a bizarre spectacle: a young woman dressed for laser tag trading devastating blows with a seemingly harmless elderly lady. As the fight progressed, horrified passengers began to intervene. "Leave that poor woman alone!" a man shouted, attempting to grab Ver's arm. "Get away from her!" a woman in a business suit demanded, positioning herself protectively near the disguised Skrull. The interference was maddening. Ver couldn't use her full strength or photon blasts for fear of harming the oblivious Terrans who were actively hindering her. The Skrull, however, had no such compunctions, using the chaos to land several painful blows before breaking free. "Help!" the Skrull cried in a quavering, elderly voice. "She's trying to hurt me." More passengers moved to shield the grandmother, shooting venomous glares at Ver. While struggling to break free from the well-meaning humans, Ver saw the Skrull slip away through the connecting door and climb onto the roof of the moving train. Cursing under her breath, Ver shoved past the protesting passengers and followed, kicking open the door at the end of the car and hauling herself up onto the roof of the speeding train. Atop the speeding train, the wind whipping violently around them, the battle continued without restraint. The Skrull morphed partially back to its natural form, its strength and agility increasing dramatically without the limitations of its elderly disguise. Ver was winning until suddenly a tunnel loomed ahead. The Skrull, seizing the opportunity, dropped back into the train and disappeared among the passengers. Ver barely managed to flatten herself against the roof before the tunnel would have decapitated her. Once safely through, she dropped back into the compartment but found no sign of the shapeshifter. The train pulled into the next station, and it looked like the Skrull had vanished with the crowd deboarding. Ver cursed under her breath, moving purposefully through the station, her eyes darting from person to person. Every face was now suspect. Every movement potentially hostile. She was so focused on her search that she nearly collided with the figure who suddenly appeared directly in her path when she reached an isolated area of the station. "Boo," Arthur said with a mischievous grin. Ver's reaction was instantaneous, her fist glowing with photon energy as she nearly unleashed a blast that would have reduced the wizard to atoms. "Bloody hell!" Arthur exclaimed, eyes widening as he jumped back. "Jumpy, aren't we? Nearly took my head off there." Ver barely managed to pull the punch, the energy dissipating with a crackle of power. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her breathing still ragged from the fight. "Were you following me?" "Obviously," Arthur replied, brushing an imaginary speck from his sleeve. I told you we'd meet again once you'd given those coppers the slip. Though I must say, that was quite the spectacle on the train. You versus Granny. Brilliant entertainment, that. Shame I didn't have proper recording equipment, would have gone viral on the evening news. Ver's eyes narrowed dangerously. You were watching? You could have helped me kill the Skrull instead of being part of the audience. They're infiltrating your planet, planning to take over from the inside, and you're treating it like a show. Arthur shrugged, maddeningly calm. Not my fight, is it? The shape-shifting aliens are your problem since you brought them here. I'm just having a bit of an adventure, aren't I? Do you enjoy getting on people's nerves? Ver asked through gritted teeth. Maybe, Arthur admitted with a small smirk. I quite like the feeling of seeing someone frustrated but unable to do anything about it. You should try it sometime, you know. All that serious soldier business must be bloody exhausting. A Kree soldier should always control their emotions and keep them in check, Ver recited automatically. Arthur's expression shifted subtly, becoming more calculating. But are you a Kree soldier? That's the question, innit? What do you mean? Ver asked, genuine confusion breaking through her irritation. Let me tell you something, Arthur said, lowering his voice and leaning closer. You might have Kree blood inside you, but you weren't born Kree. I saw that other alien, and he was very different from the people of my planet. You're not. You shouldn't be an alien at all, if I'm honest. That's a lie, Ver shot back, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. How could you possibly tell anyway? I am a mage, remember? We have our ways. Arthur tapped his temple knowingly. Want to know more? Ver hesitated, conflict evident in her eyes. No, she decided firmly. I cannot trust you yet. Unfortunate, Arthur sighed dramatically. I thought you might beg me for answers. I would have liked seeing that. Ver ignored him, pulling out the small crystal she'd retrieved during the fight with the Skrull on the train. She inserted it into her wrist device, which projected a series of hazy images: a woman in a lab coat, files labeled Project Pegasus, a bar sign reading Ponchos, and briefly, the face of a dark-skinned woman with familiar eyes. The images became increasingly unstable until the crystal overheated and began to smoke. Ver quickly ejected it, tossing the smoldering remnant aside. Nice tech, Arthur observed, eyeing her wrist device with undisguised interest. Got a spare suit or something like that lying about? I'd be very interested to buy one off you. Ver could practically see the calculations running behind his eyes, his desire to reverse engineer such advanced technology obvious. Not for sale, she replied curtly. Do you know this place? Poncho's bar. Arthur's expression brightened. As a matter of fact, I do. But before we go adventuring, we need to sort out your appearance. You're catching too much attention with your alien getup. Ver glanced down at her Star Force uniform, reluctantly acknowledging the logic. They found a nearby clothing shop, where she quickly selected a leather jacket, band t-shirt, and jeans that allowed her to blend in with the locals. Once outside and suitably disguised, Arthur led her to a secluded alley. How are we going? Ver asked, looking around for some form of transport. Where is your vehicle? Arthur smiled mysteriously. We don't need anything so pedestrian as a car, do we? Just take my hand. Ver regarded him skeptically but complied, cautiously placing her hand in his. Fair warning, this might feel a bit strange the first time, Arthur said with a mischievous glint in his eye. With a sharp crack that echoed through the alley, both of them vanished, leaving behind only a swirling eddy of displaced air. Chapter 40, Poncho's Bar. With a resounding crack, Arthur and Ver materialized in the dusty expanse of the Mojave Desert. The barren landscape stretched around them, empty save for a lone establishment in the distance, Poncho's Bar, its neon sign flickering weakly against the harsh sunlight. Arthur had cast a disillusionment charm on both of them before operating. After confirming no one was around to witness their sudden appearance, he waved his hand to remove the charm, making them visible once more. Ver doubled over, hands on her knees, taking deep breaths as her body adjusted to the unfamiliar sensation of magical transportation. What the hell was that? She gasped, looking distinctly green around the edges. Apparition, Arthur replied casually, as though they'd merely stepped off a bus. Magical teleportation. Quite handy for avoiding traffic, innit? Gets you where you need to go in a jiffy. You should have warned me, Ver growled, straightening up slowly. I've flown spaceships and gone through space jumps, but that was... She shuddered, something else entirely. Arthur's lips curled into that irritating smile she was beginning to recognize. Where would have been the fun in that? Your face was absolutely priceless. Worth the trip alone, I'd say. Vare shot him a withering look. Is everything a joke to you? Not everything, Arthur replied, his expression shifting to something more serious for a moment. But life's too short not to enjoy the little moments of discomfort, in others, preferably. Bit of a character flaw, I suppose. You're insufferable, Vare muttered, turning her attention to the bar. Its weathered exterior spoke of decades under the desert sun, the parking lot half filled with dust-covered vehicles and motorcycles. That's it? She asked skeptically. Doesn't look like much. Places rarely do, Arthur replied. But appearances can be bloody deceiving. Rather like yourself, I'd wager. Vare paused, studying him with narrowed eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Arthur shrugged, his eyes twinkling with mischief and something deeper. I feel that you're proper strong. Way beyond my league, if I'm honest. Something's limiting your power, and when that limiter's gone, most people in this universe won't stand a chance against you, much less the current me. Vare's hand unconsciously went to the Kree implant on her neck but stopped. Why should she believe the words of someone she had met only a few hours ago? Removing the implant wasn't safe, her commanders had made that abundantly clear. You don't know what you're talking about, she said curtly, turning and striding purposefully towards the bar entrance, deliberately ignoring the thoughtful, slightly challenging smile playing on Merlin's face. Arthur followed, amused. He'd planted the seed. Let her work it out. Now he was more eager to confront a certain S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who should have tracked them here. Inside, the establishment was exactly what one would expect from a remote desert watering hole: worn wooden tables, the smell of stale beer, and a collection of patrons who looked like they'd been perched on the same bar stools for decades. Faded photographs and memorabilia adorned the walls, each telling its own story of the bar's history. Vare paused as she entered, her gaze drawn to the wall of photographs. A strange sensation washed over her, not quite recognition, but something close to it. Fragments of memories, like shadows just beyond her reach. Oh, new memories surfacing, are they? Arthur remarked, watching her reaction with interest. Rather proves I'm right, doesn't it? But Vare, lost in her thoughts, ignored him and moved closer to the photographs, particularly one showing a fighter jet. What can I get ye? The bartender asked gruffly from behind the counter. Where was this photograph taken? She asked, ignoring his question and pointing at the photo of the jet. An airport, he replied dismissively, already turning away to serve another customer. Where's Pegasus? Vare pressed, the name feeling significant though she couldn't articulate why. A familiar voice answered from behind her. That's classified. Vare turned to find Nick Fury seated at a small table in the corner, watching her with undisguised interest. Not unlike the file I started on you, he continued, gesturing for her to join him. As she slid into the seat opposite him, Fury gave her new attire an appraising look. But I see you've changed it up a bit since then. Grunge is a good look for you. His gaze shifted to Arthur. Who's your friend? Didn't think you were the type to pick up strays. Another off-worlder. Arthur stepped forward before Vare could respond. Pure earthling, mate. Just playing tour guide for our confused alien visitor here. Showing her the local hotspots. Been a right adventure so far. Fury's eyebrow raised slightly at Arthur's accent. Right. Tour guide. I'll get to you later. Got more pressing matters at the moment. Did you have a rough day, Agent Fury? Vare asked, noting his disheveled appearance. Fury shrugged nonchalantly. It was cool, you know. Had a space invasion, big car chase. Got to watch an alien autopsy. Typical 9 to 5. Vare leaned forward, suddenly alert. So you saw one? I was never one to believe in aliens, Fury admitted, his expression sobering, but I can't unsee that. This is gonna get a little awkward, Vare said, studying him intently, but I gotta ask. You think I'm one of those green things? Fury replied, not a question but a statement. Can't be too careful. Fury gestured to himself. You are looking at 100% red-blooded Earthman. I'm afraid I'm gonna need proof, Vare insisted. We talking cheek swab or urine sample? Fury asked dryly. No. The DNA would match. Want my AOL password? Fury offered sarcastically. Skrulls can only sim recent memories of their host bodies, Ver explained patiently. Oh. Fury leaned back, understanding dawning. You wanna get personal? They settled more comfortably at the table, Arthur pulling up a chair to observe the impromptu interrogation with evident amusement. Where were you born? She asked abruptly. Huntsville, Alabama. But technically, I don't remember that part. Name of your first pet? Mr. Snoofers. Mr. Snoofers. Ver repeated skeptically. That's what I said. Do I pass? Not yet. First job? Soldier. Straight out of high school. Left the ranks a full bird colonel. Then. Spy. Where? It was the Cold War. We were everywhere. Fury looked almost nostalgic. Belfast. Bucharest. Belgrade. Budapest. I like the bees. I can make them rhyme. Now. Been riding a desk for the past 6 years, trying to figure out where our future enemies are coming from. He gave her a pointed look. Never occurred to me they would be coming from above. Name a detail so bizarre a Skrull could never fabricate it, Ver demanded. Fury considered this for a moment. If toast is cut diagonally, I can't eat it. You didn't need that, did you? Fury asked with a hint of amusement. No, I didn't. But I enjoyed it, Ver replied with a small smile. Okay. Your turn. Prove you're not a Skrull, Fury said, leaning back in his chair. Without hesitation, Ver raised her fist, allowing it to glow with photon energy. Fury remained unimpressed. And how is that supposed to prove to me you're not a Skrull? That's a photon blast. And a Skrull can't do that. Arthur chuckled softly. When both turned their attention towards him, he cleared his throat and leaned forward. Mind if I ask a few questions? Always wanted to know more about the secret spy world. The films make it all so bloody mysterious. Fury gave him a flat look. Negative, tour guide. My job right now is assisting our guest here. Being a gracious host and all. Oh, come on, Arthur pressed. Just tell me what this Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division is? Quite the mouthful. Never heard of it myself. Have heard of the CIA, FBI and even MI6 back home, but never this new agency. Are you proper legit or is it some made-up department with a fancy acronym? Classified, Fury stated firmly. But speaking of questions, I have a few for you. How did you make friends with our alien companion? Arthur's smile widened. Classified. Two can play at that game, Agent Fury. Bit rubbish when the tables are turned, isn't it? Fury studied him for a long moment. The smug expression on Arthur's face told him all he needed to know. This was someone who enjoyed being difficult, and he wouldn't get any straight answers from him now. Still, he made a mental note to have the agency run a background check later. No need to waste time engaging with him here. Fury turned back to Ver. So, what's our next move? Still looking for this Lawson woman? Yes, Ver confirmed, refocusing on her mission. She's connected to something called Project Pegasus. Do you know where that is? Fury hesitated, then nodded. It's a military facility. I can take you there. Are you coming? Ver asked Arthur, who seemed lost in thought. Can I come? Arthur asked, his expression suddenly innocent. Promise I'll be on my best behavior and all that. Fury thought for a moment and, surprisingly, nodded. Fine. But any funny business and you're out. In truth, he was curious about this strange Brit and wanted to keep him where he could watch him. As they rose to leave, Arthur suppressed a satisfied smile. He wondered how much S.H.I.E.L.D. knew about the wizarding world. The current Fury was not as experienced and mysterious as the director he would become in the future, so this was the perfect opportunity to extract some much-needed information. This trip was going to be bloody exciting.
Thanks for listening.